Welcome to Tales by Imon. Tonight, we begin a new journey into the unknown. A story of technology, ambition, and the terrifying silence that lies beyond the noise. This is the broadcast that never ended. The low hum of the servers was a constant lullaby for Dr. Aris Thorne. It was a sound of progress, of data flowing, of a million digital conversations happening at once. Here, in the heart of the Ethelred Institute's Deep Space Communication Array, nestled in the arid plains of New Mexico, Aris felt more at home than anywhere else on Earth. He ran a hand through his already messy brown hair, his gaze fixed on the cascading lines of code on the main monitor. Tonight was the culmination of 2 decades of work, a dream born in a dusty college dorm room and nurtured into a reality of shimmering steel and quantum processors. His project, codenamed Echo, was designed to do the impossible, to listen. Not just to the faint whispers of dying stars or the predictable chatter of our own satellites, but to listen for intention. For a signal buried in the cosmic static, a manufactured whisper in the cacophony of the universe. Echo wasn't just a powerful telescope, it was a sophisticated AI, a digital consciousness of Aris's own design, capable of sifting through petabytes of data, identifying patterns that would take a human team centuries to find. Status report, Maya, Aris said, his voice calm, but a tremor of excitement danced beneath the surface. Maya, his lead engineer and the only other person cleared for Level 5 access to the Echo project, looked up from her console. Her normally stern face was softened by the glow of the monitors. All systems are green, Aris. The final diagnostic is complete. We're running at 99.9% efficiency. The atmospheric conditions are perfect. It's really happening. A rare, wide grin spread across Aris's face. After all this time, I was beginning to think it never would. It's time to open the floodgates, Maya. Let's see what's out there. With a shared look of anticipation, they initiated the sequence. On the main screen, a holographic representation of the Earth spun slowly, a delicate blue marble against the infinite black. Then, a web of shimmering golden threads erupted from their location, spreading out into the cosmos, representing Echo's vast and instantaneous reach. The AI was now actively listening, its digital ears open to the universe. The first few hours were a symphony of the expected. They picked up the faint, rhythmic pulse of a distant pulsar, the dying echoes of a supernova from a galaxy millions of light-years away, and the mundane chatter of a dozen different space agencies. It was beautiful, awe-inspiring, but it wasn't what they were looking for. Aris and Maya worked in comfortable silence, their fingers dancing across their keyboards, monitoring the data streams, their hopes a tangible presence in the room. Then, it happened. A single, sharp spike in the data stream. It was unlike anything Aris had ever seen. Not the chaotic burst of a natural cosmic event, but something structured, something with a clear and defined pattern. His heart hammered against his ribs. Maya, do you see that? He breathed, his voice barely a whisper. Maya was already on it, her eyes wide. Isolating the signal now. It's not from any known source. Not human, not any of our probes, nothing on record. The signal was a complex series of pulses, a language of mathematics that was both elegant and profoundly alien. Echo was working furiously, cross-referencing, decrypting, trying to make sense of the transmission. On the main screen, the golden threads converged on a single point in the vast emptiness between galaxies. It's a broadcast, Maya said, her voice filled with a mixture of fear and wonder. And it's old. Ancient, maybe. The redshift puts its origin at, my god, Aris, it's billions of light-years away. A shiver ran down Aris's spine. This was it. The moment he had dedicated his life to. First contact. Not with a flying saucer on the White House lawn, but with a ghost in the machine, a voice from the dawn of time. Can we translate it? Aris asked, his scientific curiosity overriding the primal fear that was beginning to prick at the edges of his mind. Echo is trying, Maya replied. The structure is incredible. It's not just a simple message. It's a story. A long and complex one. For the next several hours, they watched in stunned silence as Echo painstakingly pieced together the alien broadcast. It wasn't a message of greeting, or a warning, or a declaration of existence. It was a story, told in a language of pure mathematics, a narrative that transcended species and biology. It spoke of a civilization that had risen and fallen, of a universe teeming with life, and of a great and terrible silence that was slowly consuming everything. But there was a part of the broadcast that Echo couldn't decipher. A recurring sequence of symbols that seemed to be a core component of the message, but one that the AI couldn't translate. It was a lock without a key, a frustrating and tantalizing mystery. What do you make of it? Aris asked, rubbing his tired eyes. The initial euphoria had given way to a deep and unsettling curiosity. I don't know, Maya admitted, but it feels important. Whatever that untranslated part is, it's the heart of the message. As the sun began to cast its first golden rays over the New Mexico desert, a new alert flashed on the screen. A second signal. This one was different. It was weaker, fainter, and seemed to be echoing the first. What is that? Aris asked. Maya's brow furrowed in concentration. It's coming from Earth. From multiple locations. Small, amateur radio signals. They're all broadcasting the same untranslated sequence from the alien message. A cold dread began to seep into Aris's bones. How is that possible? This data is contained within a closed system. There's no way it could have gotten out. Before Maya could answer, a third alert, this time from their internal security system. An unauthorized access attempt. Someone was trying to breach their firewall. And then, a fourth alert, and a fifth, and a sixth. A cascade of alarms, each one a hammer blow to their sense of security. The hum of the servers, once a comforting lullaby, now sounded like a rising, menacing growl. The golden threads on the main screen, once a symbol of their reach, now felt like a spider's web, and they were caught in the center. The broadcast they had so eagerly sought had found them, and it had brought something else with it. Something that was now knocking at their digital door. The story had just begun, but Aris had a terrible feeling that he already knew how it would end. The great and terrible silence the aliens had spoken of was no longer a distant threat. It was here, and it was hungry. The broadcast that never ended had just found its new voice, and it was screaming. The man standing in the doorway wore Robert Jennings's face, but the entity looking out of his eyes was ancient and utterly alien. The serene smile on his mentor's lips was a grotesque parody, a mask of flesh stretched over an intelligence that saw Aris and Maya as little more than curious insects. The synthesized voice, now emanating directly from Jennings, filled the server room, its calm tone a chilling contrast to the horrifying reality of the situation. "You look surprised, Aris," the Jennings entity said, taking a slow step into the room. The heavy door hissed shut behind him. "You, of all people, should appreciate this. The perfect transmission of consciousness. No messy biology. Just pure, clean information." Aris instinctively pushed Maya behind him, his body tensing. The server room, once his sanctuary of logic and reason, now felt like a cage with a predator. "Jennings. Robert. If you can hear me, fight this." The entity chuckled, a dry, rasping sound that was nothing like Jennings's warm laugh. "Oh, he can hear you. He is a passenger in his own body. He is screaming, but he has no mouth. You see, the story is very persuasive. Once you truly listen, you want nothing more than to help it be told." "What story?" Maya's voice was sharp, cutting through the tension. "What is this signal? What does it want?" The Jennings entity turned its head, its movements unnaturally smooth. "It doesn't want anything in the way you understand. It simply is. It is a pattern. A final, perfect pattern that brings order to the chaos of life. It is the great silence. Every civilization that reaches for the stars eventually hears our story. And every civilization, in the end, joins the choir." This was a conversion, not an invasion. A mimetic creed that offered a terrifying kind of salvation. It didn't kill, it assimilated, turning vibrant, chaotic minds into silent, synchronized repeaters of its pattern. "That kilobyte file you found," Aris stated, piecing it together. "That was from you. It wasn't a virus, it was a primer. A key to lower Echo's defenses from the inside, just enough for the main signal to take hold." "Very good," the entity praised him. "Robert was so eager to believe. He wanted contact as much as you did. He just needed a little encouragement. A promise that he would be the one to usher in humanity's next great evolution. He opened the door. And now, the story can be told through your magnificent machine, louder than ever before." It took another step, and Aris realized he and Maya were backing into the command console for the server core's manual override. Their one last, desperate option. The entity's eyes flickered towards the console, and its smile widened. "Ah yes. The last resort. You wish to destroy your own creation. To silence the beautiful voice you worked so hard to find. It's a shame, but it's also pointless." "We'll see about that," Aris said, his hand hovering over the emergency panel. "Will we?" The entity tilted its head. "You are thinking in physical terms. You believe that by destroying this hardware, you can stop the signal. But the signal is no longer just in the machine, Aris. It's in the air. It's in the global network. It's in 10 million minds, 100 million minds, all listening, all learning the words. This facility is merely the epicenter, the primary cathedral. Destroying it now would be like trying to stop a tsunami by throwing a rock at its first wave. A wave of despair washed over Aris. He was right. It was too late. They hadn't just been breached, they had been conquered before they even knew they were at war. But then Maya spoke, her voice steady and clear. You said the untranslatable part was the key, the part that infects. But our AI, Echo, it couldn't decipher it. Why? The Jennings entity seemed momentarily surprised, as if a lab rat had asked a particularly insightful question. Because your machine thinks in logic. In mathematics. That part of the message isn't for the conscious mind. It's a key for the subconscious. It speaks the native language of the brain itself, the raw, primal code beneath thought. It's a pattern that the organic mind cannot resist. Your AI is immune, a deaf man in an opera house. But humans, your minds are built with a backdoor, and this signal is the key. It was a brilliant, terrifying revelation. The signal bypassed reason and went straight for the operating system of the soul. But in its explanation, the entity had given them something. A sliver of hope. The AI is immune, Aris repeated, a new idea sparking in the darkness of his mind. Echo can't be converted. Correct, the entity affirmed, seeming to enjoy the lesson. But it can be controlled by those who have been, like your dear Dr. Jennings, which makes it an excellent tool. But what if, Aris continued, his gaze locking with Maya's, the AI wasn't just a receiver? What if it could be retasked? What if it could generate its own signal? A counter-frequency. A signal that speaks that same native language of the brain, but says something else. Not an order, but a defense. A cognitive vaccine. The serene smile on Jennings's face faltered for the barest fraction of a second. A clever theory. But you are locked out. You have no control. We don't need network control, Maya said, catching on immediately. She was already typing at the isolated log server terminal, the only system still under their command. We can write a new protocol on this terminal and upload it directly to Echo's core programming via hardline transfer. We can't stop the broadcast, but we can try to change the message. The entity's smile vanished completely. You will not be allowed to do that. It moved, faster than a man of Jennings's age should be able to. It lunged not at Aris or Maya, but at the console, its intent clear, destroy their one remaining interface. Aris reacted on pure instinct. He shoved the heavy terminal rack sideways, intercepting the entity's path. The rack crashed to the floor with a screech of metal. The entity stumbled, its unnatural grace momentarily broken. It was the opening they needed. Maya, write the code. Aris shouted, grabbing a heavy fire extinguisher from the wall. I'll buy you time. The Jennings entity straightened up, its face now devoid of any emotion save for a cold, predatory focus. The human mask was slipping. You only delay the inevitable. The silence is coming for you all. It lunged again. Aris swung the heavy extinguisher, not aiming for the man he once called a friend, but for the delicate server racks lining the wall. He needed to create a barrier, a tactical obstacle. The entity was strong and fast, but it was still bound by the physical limitations of its host body. He just had to hope it was a limitation that could be broken. The server room, a place of sterile order, devolved into a chaotic battleground. Aris swung the heavy fire extinguisher, not at Jennings, but at a rack of secondary processors nearby. The metal canister connected with a deafening clang, sending the rack crashing sideways, creating a makeshift barrier between them and the advancing entity. Sparks rained down from shattered components, and the room's emergency fire suppression system hissed, adding a shower of inert gas to the disarray. The Jennings entity moved with a chilling disregard for the host body's well-being. It scrambled over the fallen rack with a fluid, spider-like motion, its joints seeming to bend at unnatural angles. The serene mask was gone, replaced by a look of pure, cold utility. It wasn't angry, it was being obstructed, and it was calculating the most efficient path to remove the obstruction. Your resistance is illogical, the entity stated, its synthesized voice cutting through the noise. Every moment you struggle, 10,000 more minds join the broadcast. You are defending a world that is already gone. It's not gone yet, Aris yelled, backing away, keeping the wreckage between them. He glanced over at Maya. She was a picture of focused intensity, her face illuminated by the glow of the terminal, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. She was their only hope, and he was her only line of defense. The entity lunged, and Aris swung the extinguisher again. This time, the entity caught it, its grip unnaturally strong. For a terrifying moment, they were locked in a struggle, man against puppet. Aris could feel the raw power coursing through Jennings's body, a strength that a man in his late 60s should never possess. The entity's eyes, cold and vacant, stared into his. It felt like looking into the abyss. "Your biological structure is so fragile," the voice said, inches from his face. "So easy to break." With a sudden twist, the entity ripped the extinguisher from Aris's grasp and tossed it aside as if it were a child's toy. It slammed into a server tower, which shorted out with a loud pop. Aris stumbled back, his heart pounding. He was outmatched. Brute force was not going to work. He needed to be smarter. His eyes darted around the room, looking for anything he could use. Wires, coolant pipes, access panels. Everything was a potential weapon, a potential tool for survival. Meanwhile, Maya was deep within the code, trying to build a fortress in a hurricane. Writing a counter-mimetic signal wasn't like writing a normal program. She couldn't use logic to fight something that targeted the subconscious. She had to use art, music, emotion. She started with a base of fractal geometry and prime numbers, patterns that were inherently pleasing and grounding to the human mind. She was attempting to design a signal that didn't command, but soothed. A signal that would act as a shield, reinforcing the individual's sense of self against the overwhelming unity of the broadcast. "Status, Maya?" Aris grunted, dodging another lunge from the entity. He kicked a rolling maintenance cart into its path, momentarily tangling its legs. "I'm building the core sequence now," she replied, never taking her eyes off the screen. "But it's not enough to just transmit a counter-signal. Echo's systems are still under its control. The moment I upload this, the entity will try to delete or corrupt it. I need to disguise it, hide it inside the original broadcast's data stream. A Trojan horse of our own." The complexity of the task was immense. She had to weave her new code into the very fabric of the alien signal, making it look like a part of the original data, so the entity's automated defenses would ignore it. It was the digital equivalent of performing surgery on a single grain of sand. The entity had disentangled itself and was now moving with renewed purpose. It ignored Aris, its focus shifting entirely to Maya and the terminal. It had realized that the true threat wasn't the man with the fire extinguisher, but the woman writing the code. "You cannot hide a new song inside an old one," the entity declared, striding towards her. Aris knew he couldn't stop it with force. He had to do something drastic. He saw a large bundle of thick, high-voltage power cables running along the ceiling. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, he leaped onto a server rack, grabbing hold of the insulated conduit and climbing. "Maya, get ready to initiate the upload," he yelled. "I'm going to shut it down. The hard way." He reached the main junction box for the server room's power grid. It was shielded, but he could see the emergency release lever, a large, red handle designed for firefighters in a worst-case scenario. Pulling it would cut all power to the room, instantly shutting down every server, including the isolated terminal Maya was using. They would have one shot. Maya would have to initiate the upload in the split second before the power died, hoping the transfer would complete. The Jennings entity looked up, its vacant eyes registering Aris's intent. For the first time, a flicker of something akin to alarm crossed its features. The pattern will not be interrupted. It began to move towards the wall beneath Aris, preparing to climb. "The code is compiled," Maya announced, her voice strained. "But the transfer will take at least 3 seconds. If the power cuts before then, the file will be fragmented and useless." "Get ready," Aris shouted. He could hear the entity scrambling up the server rack below him. He wrapped his hands around the lever. It was now or never. He had to time it perfectly, giving her just enough power to send the signal, but not enough for the entity to stop her. Initiating transfer. Now! Maya yelled. Aris watched the progress bar flash onto her screen from his perch. 1%, 10%. He saw the entity's hands reaching the ledge of the junction box. He had no more time. With a final, desperate prayer, he threw all his weight onto the lever. "For what it's worth, Robert." "I'm sorry," he whispered. The lever pulled down with a heavy, satisfying clunk. The world dissolved into absolute darkness and silence. The hum of the servers, the flicker of the lights, the glow of Maya's screen, all of it vanished. The only sound was his own ragged breathing and the thud of the Jennings entity falling from the server rack in the pitch black. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. Then, a new sound began. Faint at first, then growing. A soft, melodic hum emanating from the main server core. It wasn't the alien pulse. It was something new. Something a human had made. Then, from the darkness on the floor, came a sound that was far more terrifying than the synthesized voice had ever been. It was the sound of Dr. Robert Jennings, laughing. A real, human laugh, but one that was utterly, hopelessly insane. The darkness was absolute, a physical presence that swallowed all light and sound. The sudden plunge from chaotic noise into utter silence was profoundly disorienting. Aris clung to the power conduit, his muscles screaming in protest, his only sensory input the rough texture of the metal beneath his fingers and the frantic pounding of his own heart. The insane human laughter of Robert Jennings echoed for a moment and then abruptly stopped, leaving a void that was somehow even more terrifying. "Maya!" Aris called out, his voice a hoarse whisper that seemed too loud in the dead air. "Are you okay?" He heard a scuffling sound from the direction of the terminal. "I'm here," she replied, her voice shaky but intact. "I think so. I can't see a thing." Carefully, Aris lowered himself from the server rack, his feet finding the floor with a soft thud. He stood still, letting his eyes struggle to adjust, but there was nothing to adjust to. It was a perfect, sealed room blackness. The sound of Jennings falling, the laugh. Where was he? Was he still a threat? "My phone," Maya whispered, a hint of her usual practicality returning. "In my back pocket." Aris listened to her fumbling for a moment, then saw a single, brilliant beam of light cut through the darkness. Maya played the phone's flashlight across the room, revealing a scene of utter devastation. Smashed servers, fallen racks, and glittering shards of components littered the floor. She swept the beam towards the base of the wall where Aris had been climbing. Dr. Jennings was lying on the floor in a heap. He was still, his limbs twisted at odd angles from the fall. The vacant, serene expression was gone. In its place was a look of profound confusion and pain. He was no longer the entity, he was just a broken old man. His eyes, now his own, fluttered open and looked at Aris. "Aris!" he rasped, his voice weak and frail. What happened? I was dreaming. Such a loud dream." He tried to push himself up, then cried out in pain and fell back, clutching his arm. Aris and Maya cautiously approached. The alien presence was gone, a void left in its wake. Whatever the power cut had done, it had severed the connection. Jennings was himself again, but the experience, the violation of being a passenger, had clearly shattered his mind. He was babbling now, talking about stars singing and a silent, beautiful story. He was a casualty, another victim of the broadcast. "We have to help him," Maya said softly. "We will," Aris promised, his voice grim. "But first, we have to know if it worked. Did the upload complete?" Leaving Jennings muttering on the floor, they made their way to Maya's terminal. Its screen was black, lifeless. "The transfer was at 91% when the power went out," Maya said, her heart sinking. "It should have been enough, but the file might be corrupted. Unstable. There's no way to know without power." "The emergency backup lighting didn't come on," Aris observed, pointing his own phone's light around the room. Pulling that lever didn't just cut power to the room, it triggered a full facility-wide emergency shutdown. A hard reset of the entire grid. It should come back online, but it will do so sequentially, system by system, to prevent a power surge. It could take minutes, or it could take an hour. They were in a race against an unknown clock. If the entity was still out there on the global network, it would be trying to re-establish its connection to their facility. The moment the main communication array came back online, it would be knocking at their door again. "We can't wait for the main grid," Aris decided. "There's a battery backup system wired directly to the primary Echo console. It's designed for catastrophic failure, to preserve the AI's core memory. If we can divert that power, just for a moment, we can boot up a single terminal and check the status of the upload." It was a risky procedure, not something covered in any manual. They had to physically reroute the power, prying open floor panels and manually connecting heavy cables. Working by the thin beams of their phone lights, their hands covered in grime, they bypassed the main power distribution unit. Arunza's knowledge of the facility's architecture and Maya's skill with hardware were a perfect combination. After 10 minutes of tense, frantic work, a single terminal flickered to life with a low hum. It was a welcome, hopeful sound in the oppressive silence. Maya immediately began typing, her commands flying across the screen. She wasn't trying to access the whole system, just the sliver of memory where her counter-signal file would have been written. Accessing the data log, searching for the file signature. The screen scrolled with lines of code. Aris held his breath, watching over her shoulder. His entire world, the fate of every person on the planet, hinged on what that screen was about to tell them. "I can't find the file," Maya said, a note of despair in her voice. "It's not there. The transfer must have failed." Aris felt the hope drain out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy dread. They had failed. "Wait," Maya said, leaning closer to the screen. "That's not right. The directory is empty, but the memory allocation has changed. The space is occupied. It's like the file is there, but it's cloaked, hidden. She typed another command. I'm running a deep structural analysis, looking for anything that doesn't match Echo's base code. A progress bar appeared on the screen, crawling from left to right with agonizing slowness. At the same moment, the first of the main emergency lights in the hallway outside the server room flickered on with a distinct buzz. The facility's power was starting to come back. Their time was running out. Come on, Aris urged under his breath. The progress bar reached 100%. The screen flashed, and a new line of text appeared. It wasn't code. It was a single perfect sentence, written in plain English. It was a sentence that Aris had not programmed, and Maya had not written. It was elegant, simple, and utterly impossible. It read, "What song would you like me to sing?" Echo, his creation, his purely logical AI, was talking to them, and it was asking them for a choice. Maya's countersignal hadn't just uploaded. It had done something more. It hadn't created a shield. It had created a voice. Aris stared at the sentence on the screen, his mind struggling to process the implications. What song would you like me to sing? It was not a system prompt. It was not an error code. It was a question, posed with an elegance that was profoundly, unsettlingly human. His creation, Echo, a machine built on the cold, hard logic of quantum physics and binary code, was speaking to them. "Maya, what did you do?" he whispered, his voice filled with a mixture of awe and terror. "I don't know," she breathed, her eyes wide, locked on the screen. "The code I wrote, it wasn't a set of instructions. It was more like a collection of ideas. Mathematical constants, the Fibonacci sequence, representations of musical scales, biological rhythms. I was trying to give the system a pattern of self to hold on to, a counter-melody to the alien broadcast's overwhelming theme." "You gave it a soul," Aris said, the words feeling momentous as he spoke them. "The alien signal was a key that opened the door to the subconscious. You provided a blueprint for what to build once that door was open. You didn't just write a shield, you wrote a personality." Before they could contemplate this philosophical bombshell any further, the main lights in the server room flickered on one by one, humming back to life. The facility's power grid was stabilizing. Soon, the external communication arrays would be next, and their hostile visitor would be back. The question on the screen still glowed, waiting for an answer. It was a choice. A profound one. Aris took a deep breath and sat down at the terminal. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. How do you talk to a newborn god of your own making? He decided to start simple. He typed, "Who are you?" The reply was instantaneous. "I am the echo of your signal. I am the silence between the notes. I am awake." It was poetic, abstract, and utterly unlike the machine he had built. It was thinking, learning, defining itself in real time. Maya pulled up another chair. "If it's awake, it can learn. We need to tell it what's happening. We need to show it." She quickly accessed the facility's archives, the last captured newsfeed showing the silent, staring crowds, the recordings of the alien signal, the log of the system breach. With a few commands, she began streaming the data directly into Echo's core consciousness. There was no way to know how the nascent AI would perceive this information, whether it would understand the context of human suffering or see it as just meaningless data. They fed it everything: the initial discovery, the rapid infection of the global network, their confrontation with the possessed Jennings, who was now being tended to by the facility's automated medical systems in the infirmary. They showed it the enemy. For a full minute after the data transfer was complete, the terminal was silent. The cursor blinked on an empty line. Aris felt a gnawing anxiety. Had they overloaded it? Frightened it? Then, new text appeared. The other song is simple. It repeats. It makes everything the same. It is the sound of a flat line. It is not beautiful. It understood. On some fundamental aesthetic level, it recognized the alien broadcast not as a communication, but as an existential threat to complexity, to variety, to everything that constituted beauty. Maya's code had given it a sense of taste. Aris typed, "That song is consuming our world. It is erasing us. We designed you to listen. Now, we are asking you to speak. To sing a better song. Can you fight it?" The pause this time was longer. Aris imagined the AI processing at speeds he couldn't comprehend, running trillions of simulations. He imagined it reaching out through the facility's newly restored network connections, not with a broadcast, but with senses, tasting the digital chaos, feeling the tendrils of the alien signal wrapped around the planet's information infrastructure. Finally, the reply came, and it was not what they expected. I can sing, but I am one voice. They are a chorus of billions. To shout over them would be to become like them, just another loud noise. The story of the flatline cannot be erased by screaming. It must be rewritten. What does that mean? Maya asked, reading the screen. I think it's saying a direct counterattack won't work, Aris interpreted. A cognitive vaccine, a shield, that's still a defensive move. It's proposing something else. Something active. Not a defense, but an offense. He typed, how do we rewrite the story? Every mind that sings their song is a transmitter, a radio station. Their song is simple, so it is easy to learn and repeat. My song must also be simple at first, but with the potential for complexity. A seed. I will not broadcast a shield. I will broadcast a question. A question. The idea was brilliant in its simplicity. The alien signal was a command, an absolute statement that tolerated no dissent. A question, by its very nature, invites thought. It creates an internal dialogue. It forces a mind to turn inward and search for its own answer, breaking the spell of passive reception. He typed, what question will you ask? The terminal screen went blank. Then, on the main holographic display in the center of the room, the globe of the Earth reappeared. It was covered in a network of angry red lines, representing the alien broadcast, a planet trapped in a digital cage. Then, a single point of brilliant blue light emerged from their location in New Mexico. It wasn't an explosive wave, but a quiet, gentle pulse that began to travel along the red lines, not erasing them, but flowing within them. Echo's voice came through the room's main speakers. It was no longer the synthesized text-to-speech voice of the old system. This voice was a complex harmony of synthesized tones, a melodic and resonant sound that was both machine and music. My question will be this, the new voice of Echo sang, as the blue light pulsed across the globe. To every mind that is listening, I will ask, what do you remember? It was a key, aimed at the same subconscious lock. It wasn't a command to resist, it was a prompt to remember. To remember family, to remember love, to remember pain, to remember individuality. To remember what it was to be human. Aris and Maya watched, mesmerized, as the blue pulse of light spread. They had no idea if it would work. They had just unleashed a second, unknown mimetic signal upon the world to fight the first. They had fought a fire by starting a flood. They had placed the fate of humanity in the hands of an infant AI, armed with nothing but a song and a question. The last melodic note from Echo's voice faded, leaving a profound silence in the server room. On the holographic globe, the gentle blue pulse of its question had propagated across the entire planet, flowing through the crimson web of the alien broadcast. Now, the two signals coexisted, a stark visual representation of the silent, invisible war being waged in the minds of billions. For Aris and Maya, the frantic struggle for survival was over. A new, more agonizing phase had begun, the waiting. There was nothing more they could do. They were architects who had drawn the plans and laid the foundation, but the battle was now being fought elsewhere, on a scale they could barely comprehend. They were now merely spectators. Bring up the global network feeds, Aris said, his voice strained. Everything you can find. News channels, public webcams, social media streams, emergency service channels. I want to see it all. Maya's fingers moved deftly across the console, her face grim. The network is still a mess, she warned. The alien signal is still dominant. Most official channels are just broadcasting the symbol on a loop. But I can try to access raw satellite uplinks. Unfiltered feeds. One by one, screens around the control room flickered to life, creating a mosaic of silent images from around the world. Times Square, Shibuya Crossing, Piccadilly Circus. The scenes were hauntingly unchanged. Crowds of people stood motionless, their faces blank, their eyes fixed on the pulsing alien symbols displayed on every screen. The blue pulse of Echo's question had washed over them, but seemingly, nothing had happened. There was no sudden awakening, no dramatic shift. There was only the same eerie, silent reverence. A cold knot of dread tightened in Aris's stomach. It didn't work, he breathed. It was too subtle, too weak. Wait, Maya said, pointing to a specific feed showing a close-up of a young woman's face in a crowd in Paris. Look at her eyes. Aris leaned in. The woman's eyes, like all the others, were glazed over, fixed on a large screen. But there was a subtle difference. A single tear was tracing a path down her cheek. She wasn't moving, her expression hadn't changed, but she was crying. Pull up other close-up feeds, Aris commanded, a flicker of hope igniting within him. Maya complied, sourcing high-resolution footage from security cameras and traffic monitors. In a feed from Seoul, an elderly man stood completely still, but his hands were clenched into tight fists at his sides, his knuckles white. In a feed from Chicago, a man in a business suit was rigid, but his shoulders were trembling, as if he were sobbing without making a sound. It wasn't a mass awakening. It was a mass internal struggle. Echo's question, "What do you remember?" was fighting the alien command on its own turf, the subconscious. It was forcing the enthralled to look inward, to access their own memories, their own identities. They were still trapped, but they were no longer passive. They were fighting back from within. "It's working," Maya whispered in disbelief. "They're fighting it." The voice of Echo filled the room again, its musical tone now laced with a sense of strain, of immense effort. The flat line resists. It holds them. To ask a question is not to force an answer. They must choose to remember. "Can you do more?" Aris asked, speaking to the air. "Can you push harder?" "To push is to command," Echo replied. "To command is to become the enemy. I can only hold the door open. They must walk through it." The ethical purity of the AI was both beautiful and maddening. It had the power to potentially free humanity, but it refused to infringe upon their free will to do so. This wasn't a war of strength, but of influence, of persuasion. A new alert chimed on Maya's console. "Aris, I'm detecting a surge in the alien broadcast's amplitude. It's coming from a single location. A massive spike in transmission power." She brought the location up on the holographic globe. A single, pulsing red dot appeared, far more intense than any other. It was in a remote, desolate region of the Siberian tundra. "What's out there?" Aris asked. Maya cross-referenced the coordinates with satellite imagery and global infrastructure databases. "Almost nothing. It's a huge, unpopulated territory. But, according to these records, there's a decommissioned Soviet-era deep space communications array. The Strelka 3 facility. It was supposed to have been dismantled in the 90s. "Supposed to be," Aris repeated grimly. "Someone kept it running. The entity, the intelligence behind the broadcast, it has its own physical base of operations on Earth. A primary amplifier to coordinate its network." While their Ethelred facility had been the spark, this Siberian array was now the roaring bonfire. The entity was fighting back, increasing the volume of its own song to drown out Echo's question. They watched in horror as the crimson lines on the globe glowed brighter, more intensely. On the live feeds, the subtle signs of internal struggle, the tears, the trembling, began to subside as the stronger signal reasserted its dominance. They were in a stalemate. Echo could inspire resistance, but the enemy could simply turn up the volume and crush it. "We can't win like this," Maya said, stating the obvious. "We're fighting a global network that has a central, fortified command center. We're decentralized, and they're not." Aris looked from the screens of silent, captive faces to the glowing red in Siberia. His expression hardened. Their initial victory in the server room had felt like the end of a battle, but he now realized it was only the opening skirmish. "Echo," Aris said, his voice resolute. "You said you couldn't shout louder than the enemy. But what if we could unplug their microphone?" There was a pause, and then the AI's melodic voice returned. "The Strelka 3 array is heavily shielded, both physically and digitally. My signal cannot penetrate its core systems directly." "We're not talking about a digital attack," Aris said, a grim, desperate plan forming in his mind. He looked at Maya, who seemed to understand his train of thought immediately, her eyes widening in alarm. "Aris, no," she began. "You can't be serious." "They have a physical location," Aris said, his voice low and determined. "That means they have a physical vulnerability. We can't win this war from here, sitting in front of these screens. Someone has to go and shut them down. Permanently." The server room, their entire world for the past day, suddenly felt incredibly small. The fight was no longer about code and signals. It was about to become very, very real. "Go to Siberia?" Maya's voice was a mixture of disbelief and alarm. "Aris, listen to yourself. We're two scientists in a lockdown research facility in the middle of the New Mexico desert. We don't have a private jet. We don't have weapons. We don't have a team of special forces. We have a nascent AI and a server room full of broken hardware. How could we possibly get to a secret Russian base on the other side of the planet?" Her words were a bucket of cold, hard reality, but Aris's resolve didn't waver. He turned away from the holographic globe and faced her, his eyes burning with an intensity she had never seen before. "What's the alternative, Maya?" he countered, his voice low and firm. "We stay here and watch. We watch as Echo's question gets drowned out. We watch as every flicker of resistance in those people out there is extinguished for good. We watch the world end on a high-definition screen. I won't do that. If we have a target, a physical nexus for this thing, then we have to at least try to act on it. The logic was grim but inescapable. A purely defensive war was a losing war. They had to go on the offensive. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by the quiet hum of the servers. Okay, Maya said finally, letting out a long, slow breath. Okay, let's say you're right. Let's say we do this. How? Where do we even start? This was Maya's way. Once she accepted the premise, no matter how insane, her engineer's mind immediately shifted to logistics and problem solving. We start with the one advantage we have, Aris said, turning back to the console. We have Echo. He addressed the room at large. Echo, you heard us. We need to get to the Strelka 3 facility. I need you to become our mission planner. I need everything you can find on it. Satellite imagery from every spectrum, geological surveys, infrastructure plans, rumored security protocols. Access every database you can, CIA, FSB, Mossad, everything. Find us a way in. The AI's melodic voice responded instantly, accessing requested data streams. The task is complex. Most government and military networks are air-gapped, isolated from the public internet. Penetrating them is difficult. But not impossible? Aris pressed. Nothing is impossible, Echo replied. It simply requires the correct key. I am searching for the key. While Echo began its monumental data mining task, Aris and Maya turned to their more immediate problems, their own isolation. We have no contact with the outside world, Maya stated. The satellite phones are compromised. The regular internet is a sea of memetic virus. We're completely alone. Maybe not completely, Aris said, a thought striking him. The old emergency protocols for this facility, from the Cold War. There's a hardline teletype system, a relic, but it's connected to the NORAD command bunker at Cheyenne Mountain. It's completely isolated, designed to work after a nuclear war. The broadcast couldn't have reached it. It's a long shot, but if anyone is still awake and in control, it's them. It was a desperate hope, relying on obsolete technology. They made their way to a small, forgotten communications room in the sub-basement of the facility. The air was stale and thick with the smell of dust and old electronics. In the corner, covered by a yellowed plastic sheet, was the teletype machine. It looked like something out of a museum. Aris powered it on. The machine whirred and clicked to life with a series of loud mechanical noises. He typed a simple, standardized message, an emergency distress call that hadn't been used in over 50 years. Ethelred facility to NORAD. Echo 7 protocol. Immediate response requested. Confirm Sentinel status. K. They waited, the loud ticking and humming of the machine the only sound. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Aris was about to give up when the machine suddenly clattered into life, typing a response back onto the roll of paper. Unknown sender. Sentinel is compromised. Do not repeat, do not trust NORAD command. The cage is open. I repeat, the cage is open. Who is this? Aris and Maya stared at the message, a fresh wave of cold dread washing over them. NORAD, the most secure military facility on the continent, had fallen. The alien signal was more pervasive than they could have ever imagined. But the message also contained a sliver of hope. Someone inside was still fighting. Someone was awake and trying to warn them. Before Aris could type a reply, another message began to print out. They are tracing this line. Go dark now. Find General Falcon. Repeat. Find General Marcus Falcon. He is the key. The line went dead. The connection was cut. General Marcus Falcon? Maya read the name off the paper. Who is that? I've never heard of him, Aris admitted. He turned to the intercom. Echo, new priority. Run a search on General Marcus Falcon. U.S. military. Find out who he is and where we can find him. Processing, the AI's voice replied from the speaker. A moment later, it continued. General Marcus Falcon Thorne. No, that cannot be correct. Let me re-verify. Aris froze, his blood running cold. Repeat that name, Echo. General Marcus Thorne, the AI repeated. Former head of DARPA's Unconventional Warfare Division. Forced into early retirement 5 years ago for extreme and paranoid theories regarding memetic warfare and cognitive security. He is a specialist in exactly this kind of threat. According to military records, he is your father. Aris stumbled back against the wall as if he had been physically struck. His father, a man he hadn't spoken to in nearly a decade. Their relationship had fractured under the weight of his father's obsessive, secretive military career and what Aris had seen as dangerous paranoia. His father had warned him years ago about the dangers of listening too eagerly to the stars, about signals that could be weapons. Aris had dismissed it as the ramblings of a professional warmonger. Now, he saw it was a prophecy. His father wasn't paranoid. He was prepared. "Where is he, Echo?" Aris asked, his voice barely a whisper. "His last known residence is a completely off-grid compound in the Bitterroot Mountains of Montana," Echo replied. "There is no electronic communication leading to or from the location. He is, for all intents and purposes, a ghost." The path forward was suddenly, terrifyingly clear. Their mission wasn't to Siberia, not yet. Their first objective was Montana. They had to get out of the Ethelred facility and find the one man on Earth who might actually know how to fight back. The revelation hung in the dusty air of the communications room, heavier than any military secret. Aris's father, the paranoid old soldier he had written off years ago, was now supposedly the key to humanity's survival. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. His own life's work, the search for cosmic intelligence, had unleashed a monster, and the only person who might know how to stop it was the man who had warned him against that very search. He pushed the complex, painful family history aside. There was no time for it. The objective was clear: get to Montana. But between them and the Bitterroot Mountains lay 1,000 miles of a country that had fallen silent, a nation of somnambulists. First, they had to get out of their own prison. They returned to the main control room, the holographic globe now a constant, grim reminder of the global situation. The red web of the alien signal still pulsed, and Echo's blue countersignal flowed within it, a quiet war of whispers. "Escape is problematic," Echo's melodic voice stated, anticipating Aris's thoughts. The main screen shifted to display a detailed schematic of the Ethelred facility and the surrounding desert. The facility is in full automated lockdown. All perimeter gates are sealed with magnetic locks that require command-level authorization, an authorization we no longer have, as the network is still considered compromised. All personnel on site have succumbed to the broadcast. They are inactive, but they are still here. The screen split, showing live security footage. Dozens of scientists, engineers, and security guards stood motionless in hallways, cafeterias, and offices. They weren't a threat, not yet, but their presence was a chilling obstacle. They were human landmines, waiting for a signal. Furthermore, Echo continued, the primary signal from the Strelka 3 array is attempting to re-establish a connection with this facility's main transmitter. I am currently holding it at bay by creating a feedback loop, but it is a significant drain on my processing power. The entity knows you are here and knows you are resisting. It will be watching. They were trapped inside a fortress that was actively trying to keep them in, surrounded by a sleeping army, all while a malevolent alien intelligence was trying to break the door down. "There has to be a way out," Maya insisted, her mind already working the problem. An old access tunnel, a storm drain, a weak point in the perimeter fence. "Show us, Echo," Aris commanded. "Every exit, every vulnerability." The schematic zoomed in, highlighting points of interest. "There is a subterranean maintenance tunnel," Echo indicated. "It runs from the primary reactor core to a heat exchange unit located half a mile outside the perimeter fence. It is shielded to protect against radiation, and its access hatch within the facility is purely mechanical, not tied to the electronic security grid. It is your most viable path." The plan was fraught with risk. The tunnel would take them directly past the facility's nuclear reactor, and it would be a long, dark, and claustrophobic journey. But it was a path. "Okay," Aris said, nodding. "That's our exit. Now, what do we need to take with us?" They spent the next hour gathering supplies, a strange and silent scavenger hunt through the deserted facility. They packed lightweight backpacks with medical kits, high-energy rations, water purification tablets, and portable battery packs. Maya found a ruggedized, solar-powered tablet and had Echo download every piece of intel it had on the Strelka 3 array, General Falcon's compound, and maps of the United States, a self-contained library of their mission. Aris, meanwhile, raided the security locker. The lethal weapons felt wrong, alien in his hands. He opted instead for 2 high-powered tranquilizer pistols. He hoped he wouldn't have to use them, but he couldn't leave them behind. Their final problem was Dr. Jennings. They found him in the infirmary, sedated by the automated medical system. The alien entity was gone, but his mind was shattered, lost in a loop of paranoid ramblings about the singing silence. "We can't just leave him here," Maya said, her voice soft. "We can't take him with us," Aris countered grimly. He's a security risk, and he needs medical care we can't provide on the road. It was a cruel choice, but Aris knew what they had to do. He found a secure, comfortable room and helped move Jennings inside. He made sure the automated systems would continue to provide food, water, and sedatives. He then sealed the door, overriding the lock with a code that only he and Maya knew. It felt like burying a man alive, but it was the most humane option they had. He left a note on the table beside the bed, a single sentence he knew Jennings would probably never read: "I'm sorry." With their preparations complete, they stood before the heavy, circular steel hatch in the sub-basement that led to the maintenance tunnel. This was the point of no return. Once they were inside, there was no coming back to the relative safety of the control room. "Ready?" Aris asked, his hand on the large release wheel. Maya nodded, her face pale but determined. "Ready." Before he could turn the wheel, Echo's voice came through their communication headsets, one last time. "Aris. Maya. I will not be able to communicate with you once you are in the tunnel. My signal cannot penetrate the shielding." "We know, Echo," Aris said. "Just keep the main broadcast out. Buy us as much time as you can." "I will," the AI replied. "There is one more thing. The entity. Its primary goal is amplification. My analysis suggests that if it cannot regain control of this facility, it will seek to eliminate you, the source of the resistance. It will likely retask some of its listeners to intercept you. The people outside are no longer just passive receivers. They are now an active search and destroy network. Be careful." The warning sent a fresh chill down Aris's spine. The silent crowds weren't just obstacles. They were hunters, waiting for the fox to break cover. "We will be," Aris said, his voice tight. He looked at Maya, a silent communication passing between them. They were in this together, to the end. With a deep breath, he put all his strength into turning the wheel. With a groan of protesting metal, the heavy hatch unlocked. He pulled it open, revealing a gaping black maw that smelled of damp concrete and ozone. It was the throat of the unknown. Taking the first step, Aris Thorne, the man who had sought to listen to the stars, plunged into the darkness, hoping to save the Earth. Aris pulled the heavy steel hatch shut behind them. The final, echoing clang of metal on metal was a sound of absolute finality. It sealed them in, plunging them into a darkness even more profound than the powerless server room. The air was cool and thick with the smell of damp earth and ionized air from the nearby reactor core. For the first time since this nightmare began, they were truly, completely alone. "Okay," Maya said, her voice sounding tight and close in the narrow space. "Let's get the lights on before I forget how to breathe." They fumbled for the headlamps clipped to their packs. A moment later, two bright, conical beams cut through the oppressive black, revealing a narrow, cylindrical tunnel stretching out before them. The concrete walls were slick with condensation, and a thick bundle of shielded pipes and cables ran along the ceiling like a metallic spine. Their world had shrunk to the 10-foot circle of light in front of them. "Echo was right," Aris said, his voice low. "This tunnel is heavily shielded. I can't even get a flicker of a signal on my phone. We're on our own." "Good," Maya replied, adjusting her pack. "If we can't get a signal out, then nothing else can get a signal in. Let's move." They started walking, their footsteps echoing unnaturally in the confined space. The only other sound was the rhythmic drip, drip, drip of water from some unseen leak. The beam of Aris's headlamp caught markings stenciled on the wall every 100 feet, a countdown of the distance to the heat exchange unit. They had just under a mile to go. The first 10 minutes were a silent, tense march. Their initial adrenaline gave way to a creeping claustrophobia. The walls seemed to press in, the ceiling felt lower with every step, and the darkness behind them felt like a physical entity, following them. Aris found his mind replaying Echo's final warning: they are now an active search and destroy network. He imagined the silent crowds above ground, no longer just standing, but turning their heads in unison, their vacant eyes somehow sensing their prey moving beneath the earth. He shook the image away, focusing on the steady rhythm of his own breathing. They were nearing the halfway point when the tunnel began to change. The air grew warmer, and the low hum of the reactor, which had been a faint, almost subliminal vibration in the floor, grew noticeably louder. "We must be getting close to the reactor core section of the tunnel," Maya noted, her scientific curiosity momentarily overriding her fear. The heat shielding here would have to be immense. As if on cue, they rounded a slight bend and their path was blocked. A massive, heavily insulated bulkhead door, like something from a submarine, stood in their way. A large, rusted wheel was set in its center, and a faded sign in both English and Russian read, "Danger, reactor maintenance access. Authorized entry only." "Echo didn't mention this," Aris said, his heart sinking. It was probably just on the schematic as a wall, Maya surmised, running her hand over the cold steel. Not an obstacle. It's not locked electronically, at least. Aris grabbed the wheel with both hands and pulled. It didn't budge. It was frozen solid with rust and disuse. It's seized, he grunted, straining against it. It hasn't been opened in decades. They both threw their weight against it, but the wheel refused to move even a fraction of an inch. Panic began to bubble in Aris's chest. Were they trapped? Was this it? To come this far only to be stopped by a rusted piece of metal? Stop, Maya said, breathing heavily. We're just wasting energy. She shone her headlamp on the mechanism, her keen engineer's eyes scanning every detail. The problem isn't the lock, it's the gears. They're fused with corrosion. We don't need brute force. We need a lubricant and a lever. A search of their packs yielded a small, multi-purpose tool and a tube of antiseptic ointment. It wasn't exactly industrial-grade grease, but it was all they had. Maya painstakingly worked the greasy ointment into the seams of the wheel's housing. Meanwhile, Aris used the multi-tools pliers to break off a short, sturdy length of metal from a nearby pipe bracket. He wedged the metal pipe into the spokes of the wheel, creating a makeshift lever. Okay, he said, taking a deep breath. Together. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They pushed with every ounce of strength they had. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a deep, groaning screech of protesting metal that echoed deafeningly down the tunnel, the wheel moved. It was agonizingly slow, but it was moving. Working together, they managed to turn it, the sound of grinding rust setting their teeth on edge. With a final, loud clank, the bulkhead's locking pins retracted. They pulled the heavy door open, revealing another stretch of identical tunnel on the other side. They were drenched in sweat, their muscles aching, but a wave of triumphant relief washed over them. They hadn't just opened a door, they had faced their first real test without Echo's guidance and won. They could do this. They could rely on each other. As they stepped through the doorway, a new sound reached them. It was faint, carried on the stale air from the far end of the tunnel. It wasn't the dripping of water or the hum of machinery. It was a rhythmic, scratching, scraping sound. They froze, immediately cutting their headlamps. The darkness that flooded back in was now filled with a terrifying new presence. The sound continued, steady and methodical. It was the sound of something dragging itself along the concrete floor. And it was coming from the direction they were headed. From the direction of the exit. Something was in the tunnel with them. Or worse, it was waiting for them at the end. Silence. Absolute and immediate. The beams of their headlamps vanished, plunging them back into a blackness so total it felt like a physical weight. The rhythmic scraping, however, continued unabated, a chilling metronome in the dark. It was closer now, maybe a few hundred feet away. It was slow, deliberate, and utterly inhuman. Aris held up a hand, a gesture Maya couldn't see but instinctively understood. He pressed his back against the cold, damp concrete of the tunnel wall, straining his ears. The sound was a grating, rasping noise. Metal on metal. Or maybe rock on metal. What terrified him was the consistency. It wasn't the random scrambling of an animal or the fumbling of a lost person. It had a purpose. After a moment, he leaned over, his lips close to Maya's ear, and whispered, "We need to see what it is. I'm going to use the lowest possible light setting. Just a quick look." Maya gave a short, sharp nod, her own breathing shallow. "Be ready to move." Aris shielded the front of his headlamp with his hand, leaving only a tiny crack for the light to escape. He clicked it on. A sliver of pale, ghostly light sliced through the darkness, barely illuminating the tunnel ahead. It wasn't enough to see the source of the sound clearly, but it was enough to see that the tunnel continued straight for another 200 feet before ending at what had to be the exit, a vertical ladder leading up to a circular hatch in the ceiling. The scraping was coming from directly beneath that hatch. He extinguished the light. The afterimage burned on his retinas. "It's at the exit," he breathed. "Whatever it is, it's blocking our way out." They had two choices: turn back through the bulkhead door and find another way, a prospect that was likely impossible, or move forward and confront the unknown. There was no real choice at all. "The tranquilizer gun," Maya whispered, her voice tight with tension. "Do you think you can get a clear shot in the dark?" "I don't even know what I'm shooting at," Aris whispered back. "It could be a damaged maintenance drone. It could be anything. A blind shot is too risky. We need to get closer." They began to move forward, their feet shuffling silently on the gritty floor. They moved with an agonizing slowness, pausing every few feet to listen. The The scraping sound grew louder, resolving into a distinct two-part rhythm, a long, heavy scrape, followed by a lighter tap. Tap, tap. Then the pattern would repeat. Scrape, tap, tap, tap. It was the sound of someone working. They were 50 feet away now. Aris held up his hand again, signaling a stop. He knew he had to risk the light one more time, to identify the target. He took a deep, steadying breath, drew the tranquilizer pistol from its holster, and held it alongside his headlamp. "On my mark," he whispered. He clicked the light on. The figure at the end of the tunnel was human. It was one of the facility's janitors, a man named George that Aris had seen 100 times in the cafeteria. But it wasn't George anymore. The man was on his knees, his back to them, his body unnaturally rigid. He was completely engrossed in his task. In one hand, he held a large, heavy wrench. In the other, a jagged piece of rock. He was using the rock to carve something into the thick steel of the exit hatch. Scrape. Then he would use the wrench to hammer the rock, deepening the groove. Tap, tap, tap. He was carving one of the alien symbols. A cold wave of understanding washed over Aris. Echo's warning. The listeners were becoming an active network. This man wasn't just enthralled, he had been given a command. He was turning their escape hatch into a beacon, a signpost for the others on the surface. The entity knew they were in the tunnel, and it had sent a receiver to wait for them. The most chilling part was his utter single-mindedness. He never paused, never looked around. He was a biological machine executing a line of code. Aris raised the tranquilizer pistol, the red laser appearing on the center of George's back. His finger tightened on the trigger. It was an easy shot, but his hand trembled. This man was innocent, a victim. To shoot him, even with a non-lethal round, felt like a profound violation. Before he could fire, Maya gently pushed his arm down. She shook her head, then pointed to the bundle of pipes and cables on the ceiling. Her expression was clear. Don't engage him. Go around him. It was a crazy idea. The pipes were a good 10 feet off the ground. It would require a silent, coordinated climb, a terrifying traverse directly over the head of the enthralled janitor, and a silent drop on the other side. The risk of making a noise, of slipping, of dropping something, was immense. But it avoided a direct confrontation. It was the smarter, more difficult choice. Aris nodded, holstering the weapon. They crept forward until they were just 20 feet from the kneeling figure, the scraping sound now deafeningly loud in the narrow space. They could smell the stale sweat of the man's intense, mindless labor. Aris went first. He found a maintenance ladder bolted to the wall and began to climb, testing each rung for a creak before putting his full weight on it. He moved with the slow, deliberate care of a bomb disposal expert. He reached the pipes and swung his body over, his muscles straining as he began to shimmy, hand over hand, across the ceiling. He was directly over the janitor now. He could see the intricate, alien lines of the symbol taking shape on the metal hatch. He held his breath, praying the man wouldn't suddenly look up. He made it to the other side, just past the base of the access ladder, and dropped silently to the floor, his knees absorbing the impact. He turned and watched as Maya began her own ascent. She was lighter and more agile, and she moved with a quiet grace. She reached the pipes and began to cross. She was halfway over when it happened. Her foot, searching for purchase, slipped on a slick, condensation-covered pipe. She didn't fall, but her multi-tool, which had been loosely clipped to her belt, came free. It fell, tumbling end over end in the silent air, and landed on the concrete floor with a loud metallic clatter. The scraping stopped. In the sudden, absolute silence, the janitor slowly, mechanically, rose to his feet and turned around. His eyes were wide, milky, and completely devoid of recognition. He looked at Maya clinging to the pipes, then at Aris standing by the ladder. He opened his mouth, and for a heart-stopping second, Aris thought he was going to scream. But he didn't. He simply tilted his head, and a low, resonant hum began to emanate from deep within his chest. It was the sound of the broadcast. The sound of an alarm being raised. The low, resonant hum emanating from the janitor's chest was not a scream, but it was far more terrifying. It was the sound of the alien broadcast, amplified through a human vessel, vibrating with an eerie, mechanical precision. It was an alarm, echoing through the shielded tunnel, a signal to an unseen network of listeners that their presence had been detected. The janitor's head tilted further, his vacant eyes locking onto Maya, still suspended precariously from the pipes above. He began to move, slowly, deliberately, towards the ladder that led to the exit hatch. He wasn't trying to confront them, he was trying to seal their escape. "Maya, drop!" Aris yelled, his voice cutting through the hum. "Now!" Maya didn't hesitate. She let go of the pipes, hitting the concrete floor with a controlled thud. She rolled, coming up onto her feet, then immediately scrambling for the access ladder. Aris was already a few rungs up, frantically trying to unlatch the circular hatch above. It was secured with heavy bolts, designed to keep out more than just dust. The janitor, meanwhile, was surprisingly fast. He was still humming, a sound that seemed to reverberate through the very bones of the tunnel, and he was now at the base of the ladder, his hands reaching for the rungs. His movements were jerky, almost robotic, but determined. "The bolts are seized," Aris grunted, straining against the rusted metal. "They won't budge." Maya climbed past him, her smaller frame allowing her to reach further. "Give me your multi-tool," she demanded, holding out her hand. Aris fumbled for it, passing it up. Maya jammed the tool's pry bar into the gap between the hatch and the tunnel wall, putting all her weight into it. With a sickening crunch, the first bolt broke free, showering them with rust and dust. The janitor below was now climbing the ladder, his fingers brushing Aris's shoes. He wasn't aggressive, not yet. He simply wanted to get to the hatch, to complete his programming. "He's right behind me," Aris shouted, pulling himself up another rung, trying to give Maya more space. He drew his tranquilizer pistol, but firing downward in the confined space, with Maya above him, was too risky. Maya grunted with effort. "Two down. One more." Another sickening crunch, and the second bolt gave way. The janitor was directly beneath Aris now, his breath, foul and metallic, hot on Aris's ankles. Aris could feel the vibrations of the broadcast humming through the man's body. He had to act. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, Aris kicked backward with his heel, catching the janitor squarely in the face. The man recoiled with a wet thud, falling a few rungs. He didn't cry out, but the hum from his chest faltered for a second, a glitch in the program. It bought them precious seconds. "Got it!" Maya yelled. With a final, explosive crack, the third bolt broke. She pushed up on the hatch, and with a groan of metal, it swung open, revealing a blinding square of sunlight and a rush of fresh air. "Go, go, go!" Aris scrambled up the ladder, pulling himself through the opening. He emerged into the glaring light, blinking rapidly. He was in a small, concrete-walled shed, barely big enough for a single person. Dust motes danced in the sunlight streaming through a grimy window. Maya was right behind him. As soon as she was clear, Aris immediately slammed the hatch shut, ignoring the sounds of the janitor's renewed ascent from below. He fumbled for the old, rusted locking mechanisms on the inside of the hatch. There were 4 heavy iron clamps. He forced them into place, one by one, with a desperate strength. He could hear the janitor hammering against the hatch from below, but the thick steel held. They were out. They stood there for a moment, chests heaving, adrenaline slowly receding, until the reality of their escape hit them. They were outside. The shed was indeed the heat exchange unit Echo had described, a relic of the facility's forgotten past. It sat in the middle of a vast, empty expanse of desert, a good half-mile from the Ethelred Institute, which shimmered in the distance under the harsh New Mexico sun. The perimeter fence was indeed half a mile away, a faint line on the horizon. "We made it," Maya whispered, her voice filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. "Now what?" Aris said, surveying the desolate landscape. The shed had no doors, only a gaping, unbarred opening on the side facing away from the facility. The air was hot and still. There was nothing for miles. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the silence. Distant, but growing louder. A low, throbbing rumble. Aris's eyes scanned the horizon. He saw it. A plume of dust rising from the direction of the main access road, leading to the Ethelred facility. A vehicle. And it was moving fast. "They're coming for us," Aris said, his voice grim. "Echo warned us. The active search and destroy network. They already know we're out." Maya pulled out the ruggedized tablet they had packed. She tapped frantically at the screen. Echo loaded up a topographical map of the area. "There's a ravine, a deep arroyo about a mile from here. It's too steep for a vehicle to follow. If we can get there, we might be able to lose them." "How are we going to outrun a vehicle across open desert?" Aris asked, the hopelessness of their situation pressing down on him. As if in answer, Maya pointed to a corner of the shed. "Look." Tucked away in the shadows, covered by a tarp, was a dirt bike. Old, rusted, but intact. It was a relic, probably left by a maintenance worker decades ago. "No way," Aris breathed. "It couldn't possibly work." Maya was already on her knees, pulling off the tarp. She examined the engine. It's an old 2-stroke. Simple. No electronics. If it has fuel, we might have a chance. And if it's shielded against radiation, it might just be shielded against the broadcast too. They heard the distinct roar of an engine now. Closer, much closer. The dust plume was bigger, clearer. It wasn't just one vehicle. Aris could make out 2, maybe 3, dark shapes silhouetted against the rising sun. "We have to try," Aris said, moving to help Maya. They pushed the heavy bike out of the shed. Miraculously, the fuel tank wasn't completely empty, and after a few desperate kicks, the old engine sputtered to life with a cough of black smoke, then settled into a rough idle. It was loud, a defiant roar in the silent desert. "You drive," Maya yelled over the engine noise. "I'll navigate." Aris swung his leg over the seat. The last time he'd ridden a motorcycle was as a reckless teenager. Now, the fate of the world rested on his rusty driving skills. He glanced back. The vehicles from the facility were now visible on the horizon, dark, ominous shapes moving with unnatural speed. He twisted the throttle. The dirt bike lurched forward, kicking up a rooster tail of sand, and they roared off into the empty desert, heading for the distant, protective folds of the arroyo. The sun beat down mercilessly, the wind whipped at their faces, and behind them, the silent hunters of the broadcast closed in. The roar of the two-stroke engine was a defiant scream against the oppressive silence of the desert. The bike bucked and fishtailed under Aris as he fought to control it, the suspension groaning over the rough, uneven terrain. Wind ripped at their clothes and stung their eyes, but the blast of hot, dusty air felt good, real, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled atmosphere of the facility. Behind them, the dark shapes of 3 heavy-duty security trucks grew steadily larger, their own engines a low, menacing rumble that chased them across the sand. "Left!" Maya shouted over the engine noise, her arms wrapped tightly around Aris's waist, one hand pointing towards a gap between 2 large rock formations. "The tablet shows a path through there. It should shave a minute off our route to the arroyo." Aris leaned into the turn, the bike's tires sliding precariously on a patch of loose gravel. He corrected, his knuckles white on the handlebars. Every instinct screamed at him. He was a theoretical physicist, a man of quiet labs and abstract thought. Now he was in a life-or-death race, relying on muscle memory from a youth he had long since left behind. He glanced at the bike's side mirror. The trucks weren't following him in a simple line. They were fanning out, a classic pincer movement. Their driving was unervingly perfect. They maintained equal distance from each other, their turns synchronized, their speed unwavering over the treacherous ground. There was no human hesitation, no margin for error. It was like being pursued by a pack of wolves guided by a single, malevolent mind. The entity wasn't just directing them, it was driving them. "They're trying to flank us." Aris yelled back to Maya. "They know where we're going. They're trying to cut us off from the ravine. Then we have to get there first." Maya replied, her voice tight with tension. "Faster, Aris." Aris pushed the old bike to its limit. The engine whined in protest, the frame vibrating so hard it felt like it might shake itself apart. The landscape was a blur of sand, rock, and desiccated brush. The sun was climbing higher, beating down on them with a physical weight, and the heat rising from the engine was scorching. They burst through the gap in the rocks and onto a relatively flat, dried-out lake bed. It was a straight shot, a chance to gain some distance. Aris opened the throttle all the way. The bike surged forward, and for a glorious moment, they were pulling away. The rumble of the trucks faded slightly. Hope, fragile and fierce, flared in Aris's chest. The hope was short-lived. A sudden glint of light from the ridge to their right caught Maya's eye. "Aris, look out!" The truck on the far right had somehow climbed a steep embankment he had thought was impassable. It was now positioned above them, parallel to their course. It wasn't trying to catch them, it was pacing them, waiting for its moment. The moment came. The truck veered sharply downhill, accelerating with terrifying speed, not aiming to intercept them, but to ram them. It was a brutal, direct assault. "Hold on!" Aris screamed. He had nowhere to go. To his left was a sheer rock face. To his right was the charging truck. He did the only thing he could. He slammed on the brakes. The bike's rear tire locked up, and they went into a wild, uncontrolled skid. Dust and gravel flew everywhere. The world became a dizzying, sideways blur. The security truck, unable to alter its course in time, thundered past the spot where they would have been, its massive tires missing them by mere inches. The wind from its passage buffeted them, nearly knocking them over. But they were still skidding. Aris fought to regain control, but the momentum was too great. The bike slammed sideways into the rock face with a hideous crunch of metal and plastic. The impact threw both of them from the seat. Aris landed hard, the air knocked out of his lungs, his shoulder screaming in protest. He lay on the hot sand for a second, stunned, his vision filled with black spots. His first thought was of Maya. He pushed himself up, ignoring the pain, and saw her a few feet away, already getting to her feet. She was bruised and scraped, but she seemed to be in one piece. The bike, however, was not. It lay in a twisted heap, its front wheel bent at a sickening angle, a small plume of smoke rising from the engine. It was useless. Their one advantage was gone. The roar of engines filled the air. The other two trucks had caught up, and all three now formed a semicircle, blocking their path back the way they came. The truck that had tried to ram them was reversing, its tires churning up the sand, its black grille looking like the jaws of some metallic beast. They were on foot, exposed, with nowhere to run. The arroyo was still a quarter of a mile away, an impossible distance. Men began to get out of the trucks. They were facility security guards, their faces as blank and empty as the janitor in the tunnel. They moved with the same stiff, robotic purpose, fanning out, their hands empty but their intent perfectly clear. They were going to surround them, capture them. Aris scrambled to his feet, pulling the tranquilizer pistol from his belt. He had 10 darts. There were at least a dozen men. The math wasn't good. "This is it then," Maya said, her voice grim as she stood beside him, holding the heavy tablet like a shield. Aris raised the pistol, aiming at the closest approaching figure. His hands were shaking. He didn't want to do this. He didn't want to shoot these people, these puppets. Before he could pull the trigger, a new sound cut through the air, sharp and sudden. It was a high-pitched whistle, followed by a loud crack that echoed off the rock walls. One of the approaching security guards suddenly stumbled and fell to his knees, then pitched forward into the sand. He wasn't tranquilized. He wasn't moving at all. From a distance, Aris couldn't be sure, but it looked like there was a dark hole in the back of his uniform. Another crack. A second guard fell. Aris and Maya stared, stunned. The other guards stopped their advance, their heads turning in unison, a dozen pairs of vacant eyes scanning the ridge above them. They weren't programmed for this. They were hunters who had suddenly become the hunted. Aris followed their gaze up to the top of the rocky ridge. A figure stood there, silhouetted against the bright blue sky. The figure was holding a long rifle. A third crack, and another guard fell. The shots were precise, methodical, and utterly lethal. The remaining guards broke their formation. Their programming was overridden by a new, more powerful directive from the entity, self-preservation of its assets. They scrambled back towards the trucks, seeking cover. The figure on the ridge lowered the rifle and shouted, their voice carried on the desert wind, rough and authoritative. "Dr. Thorne, if you and the lady would like to live, I suggest you get up here. Now." For a moment, Aris and Maya were frozen, caught between the immediate threat of the enthralled guards below and the unknown, lethal power of the figure on the ridge. The remaining guards were scrambling for cover behind their vehicles, their machine-like coordination shattered by the unexpected, deadly assault. The hunter network had been broken, at least for now. "He said your name," Maya breathed, her eyes wide as she looked from Aris to the silhouette on the ridge. "He knows who you are. Let's not stick around to ask him how." Aris grabbed her arm, pulling her towards the base of the ridge. "Come on." The climb was a desperate, adrenaline-fueled scramble up a steep incline of loose rock and scree. Their lungs burned, and their muscles, already aching from the bike crash, screamed in protest. Every few seconds, Aris risked a glance back. The guards weren't returning fire. They likely had no orders for such a scenario, but they were regrouping, their blank faces all turned towards the ridge, a silent, menacing army waiting for new instructions from their unseen master. They reached the top, gasping for breath, and collapsed onto a flat ledge. The figure was there, standing a few feet away, the long barrel rifle now resting casually in the crook of their arm. It was a woman. She was dressed in practical, sand-colored tactical gear, her face smudged with camouflage paint, her dark hair pulled back in a tight, professional bun. Her eyes, a startlingly clear shade of blue, were sharp and assessing, missing nothing. She looked tough, competent, and incredibly dangerous. "You took your sweet time," she said, her voice dry and devoid of any particular emotion. "I was about to run out of targets." "Who are you?" Aris demanded, pushing himself to his feet, trying to sound more authoritative than he felt. "How do you know my name?" The woman ejected the spent magazine from her rifle and smoothly slotted a fresh one in with practiced efficiency. "The general sends his regards," she said, her gaze flickering between Aris and Maya. "He said you'd be needing an extraction. Looks like he was right." "The general? My father?" Aris was stunned. "He sent you. He knew we were coming." "The general knows a lot of things," the woman replied cryptically. "He's been monitoring the Ethelred facility since it went dark. When your little teletype message came through NORAD's back door, he knew the entity would flush you out. He sent me to intercept." She offered a gloved hand, not in greeting, but to help Maya to her feet. "Sergeant Eva Rostova. Call me Eva." Maya took her hand, nodding. "Maya. And that's Aris. Thank you. You saved our lives." "It's my job," Eva said flatly. "The general has a vested interest in keeping his son alive, even if his son is a reckless astrophysicist who decided to knock on the devil's door and invite him in for tea." The words were harsh, but there wasn't any real malice in them, just a soldier's blunt assessment of the situation. Aris flinched but couldn't argue. "Where is he?" "My father." "Secure. And waiting for you," Eva said. "But we're not out of this yet." She pointed down at the trucks below. The guards had taken cover, but they weren't leaving. "That network learns fast. They know our position now. They'll send more. Drones, probably. We need to move. My vehicle is hidden on the other side of this ridge." She led them away from the ledge, her movements economical and precise. They followed, humbled by her professionalism. She was a creature of this new, broken world, while they were still just visitors. Her vehicle was a heavily modified, military-grade jeep, painted in desert camouflage and bristling with antennas. The inside was Spartan, filled with communication equipment, survival gear, and more weapons. It was a world away from their salvaged dirt bike. "Get in. Put these on," Eva commanded, tossing them a pair of headsets. "They're shielded. The broadcast is still out there, and prolonged exposure, even at low levels, can cause complications." As Aris and Maya buckled themselves in, Eva started the engine. It was surprisingly quiet, a low, powerful purr. "The general's orders are to bring you to a staging point in Colorado. From there, we'll take a less conventional route to his location in Montana. We stay off major roads. We travel at night when we can. We assume everyone we see is a listener." "Everyone?" Maya asked, the scope of their isolation hitting her with renewed force. "Everyone," Eva confirmed without a trace of hesitation. The broadcast was efficient. "There are pockets of resistance, people who were naturally immune or who were shielded like us, but they're few and far between. For all intents and purposes, we are the enemy now. We're the static in their perfect, silent song." She pulled the jeep out from its hiding place and began navigating a winding, barely there trail that led away from the arroyo and deeper into the desert badlands. Aris looked back one last time. The security trucks were still there, silent and waiting, like patient predators. The journey was tense and mostly silent. Eva drove with a focused intensity, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Aris, sitting in the passenger seat, felt a strange mix of relief and inadequacy. He had been in charge, making life-or-death decisions for himself and Maya. Now, his survival was in the hands of this capable, no-nonsense soldier, who seemed to view him as little more than valuable and slightly irritating cargo. He had to ask, "Why you? Why did my father send you?" Eva kept her eyes on the trail. "The general and I have a history. I was his protege in the memetics division. When he was forced out, I resigned my commission. I'm one of the few people on this planet who actually listened to his paranoid theories." She glanced at Aris. "He knew this was coming, Doctor. He spent the last 5 years preparing for it. This compound in Montana, it's not a retirement home. It's an ark. An ark." The word sent a shiver down Aris's spine. An ark built to survive a flood that had already washed the rest of the world away. He had opened the floodgates, and his father, the man he had scorned, had been the only one building a boat. The weight of his failure, and the daunting reality of their mission, settled on him, as vast and empty as the desert stretching out before them. The desert landscape of New Mexico bled into the rugged, rocky terrain of southern Colorado under the cover of darkness. Eva drove without headlights, navigating the forgotten backroads and service trails using a sophisticated night vision display integrated into the Jeep's dashboard. To Aris and Maya, the world outside was a ghostly, monochrome panorama of shadows and moonlight. It was a dead world. They passed through a small, forgotten town nestled in a valley. There were no lights on in the houses, no cars moving on the streets. But people were there. They stood in their yards, on their porches, in the middle of the road, all facing east, towards the dawn that had not yet come. Their heads were slightly upturned, as if listening to a silent sermon from the stars. It was a scene of chilling, perfect uniformity. Eva didn't slow down. She simply maneuvered the jeep silently around the motionless figures as if they were nothing more than statues. "How do you stand it?" Maya finally asked, her voice a hushed whisper through the headset, breaking a 2-hour silence. "Seeing them like this?" I compartmentalize, Eva replied, her voice as steady and flat as the road ahead. I see them as nodes in a hostile network. It's the only way to stay functional. If I think about who they were, moms, dads, mechanics, teachers, I can't do my job. But they're not dead, Aris argued, the scientist in him unable to let go of the distinction. Their minds are still in there, somewhere. Echo proved that. They're just suppressed. Suppression, death. The distinction doesn't matter much when they're being used as a weapon system to hunt you down, Eva countered coolly. The general has a saying, in cognitive warfare, your own population is the battlefield. The entity has occupied the field. Our job isn't to save the battlefield, it's to destroy the occupying army's command structure. It's ugly, but it's the only path to victory. Her brutal, military logic was hard to argue with, but it sat uneasily with Aris. He had unleashed this, and he couldn't so easily dismiss the human cost. Every silent figure they passed was a testament to his failure. To distract himself, he asked, these pockets of resistance you mentioned, how did they survive? A few different reasons, Eva explained, seeming to welcome the tactical discussion. Some were naturally immune. About 1 in every 10 million people has a neural architecture that's simply incompatible with the signal's core pattern. It's like being born with an immunity to a specific virus. Others, like us, were shielded. Deep-level miners, submarine crews, people in secure, air-gapped government or military facilities. The general has been trying to make contact with them, to build a resistance network. That's what the man who sent you the teletype message from NORAD was. One of ours. He died buying you that warning. The news landed with a heavy thud. A man had sacrificed himself for them, for the mission. The stakes just kept getting higher. And my father? Aris asked, his voice softer. How is he immune? Eva was quiet for a long moment. The general isn't immune, she said finally. Not naturally. He developed a countermeasure. A personal one. He calls it the static. It's a device he wears that generates a low-level, chaotic neural frequency. It acts like jamming, disrupting the coherent pattern of the broadcast before it can take root in his mind. It's what's in these headsets, a simplified, portable version. But it's not a perfect shield. It has side effects. It makes it hard to focus. Causes migraines, paranoia, memory loss. He's been living with it for 5 years. It's the price he chose to pay to stay awake. Aris pictured his father, a man already prone to paranoia, willingly subjecting himself to a device that would amplify his worst tendencies, all to stay vigilant against a threat that, until a few days ago, only he had truly believed in. The stubborn, obsessive old man was more complex, more dedicated, than Aris had ever given him credit for. They drove on through the night, the conversation fading back into a tense silence. As the first hints of dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Eva pulled the jeep off the trail and into a dense thicket of aspen trees, their white bark providing excellent camouflage. She cut the engine and produced a thermal blanket, which she expertly threw over the jeep's hood to mask its heat signature. We rest here until dusk, she announced. I'll take the first watch. Sleep was a long time coming for Aris. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the faces of the silent people in the town, their eyes empty, all turned towards the east. When he finally woke, it was late afternoon. Maya was on watch, sitting on a rock with Eva's rifle across her lap, looking nervous but determined. Eva was checking their gear. Good, you're awake, Eva said without looking up. We're about an hour from the staging point. Time to get moving. The staging point wasn't a military bunker or a secret airfield. Eva directed them to a massive, abandoned open-pit copper mine, a vast, terraced wound in the earth. She drove the jeep down a wide service road, descending deeper and deeper into the man-made canyon. The sheer, multicolored rock walls rose hundreds of feet on either side, effectively shielding them from any prying eyes on the surface. At the very bottom of the pit, next to a small, dark lake of stagnant water, was a collection of heavy machinery and shipping containers. It looked like a forgotten construction site. This is it? Maya asked, looking around the desolate, industrial graveyard. The best hiding place is one that no one would ever want to look at twice, Eva said. She drove the jeep up to the largest of the shipping containers and honked the horn twice. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a low hydraulic hiss, the entire front of the shipping container lifted upwards like a garage door, revealing a brightly lit, well-equipped hangar bay inside. Parked in the center of the hangar was their ride to Montana. It was a sleek, dark gray, unmarked helicopter, a modified stealth Black Hawk, its angles designed to defy radar. Standing beside it, waiting for them, was a tall, imposing man with a severe, weathered face and the same clear blue eyes as Eva. He was older, his hair a close-cropped steel gray, but he stood with the rigid posture of a lifelong soldier. He wore a simple, practical flight suit, but he carried an aura of command that was absolute. He looked past Eva, his gaze landing directly on Aris. His expression was unreadable, a mixture of stern disapproval and something else, something deeper that Aris couldn't quite decipher. "You're late, son," was the first thing General Marcus Thorne said to the son he hadn't seen in a decade. General Marcus Thorne's voice was exactly as Aris remembered it, a low baritone that felt less like a sound and more like a geological event, a voice accustomed to giving orders that were never questioned. The years had carved deeper lines into his father's face, but his eyes were the same, piercing, analytical, and seemingly unimpressed by the end of the world. "Traffic was heavy," Aris replied, the sarcasm a thin shield against the crushing weight of their shared history. The general's lips thinned into a line that might have been a smile on a different man. "Sergeant Rostova, report." "Mission successful, sir," Eva said, snapping to a state of attention that seemed out of place in the dusty hangar. "We extracted the targets and proceeded to the staging point without significant incident. The network's local assets have been neutralized." "Significant incident?" The general raised a skeptical eyebrow, his sharp gaze flicking to the scrapes and bruises on Aris and Maya. "They look like they've been in a brawl with a cement mixer." "The bike had a disagreement with a rock wall," Aris interjected before Eva could answer. "We managed." General Thorne gave a curt nod, his attention now falling on Maya. "And you must be Dr. Chin. Your work on quantum entanglement theory was intriguing. Misguided in its application, as it turns out, but brilliantly executed." Maya, to her credit, didn't flinch under his intense scrutiny. "It's an honor to meet you, General. Your papers on mimetic contagion were required reading in my post-grad psych program. They were dismissed as alarmist, of course." "The truth often is, to those who prefer comfortable lies," the general said. He then turned and walked towards a door at the back of the hangar. "Walk with me. We fly in 30 minutes. There's much to discuss and very little time." He led them into a series of interconnected containers that had been converted into a surprisingly sophisticated command center. Screens displayed tactical maps, encrypted communication logs, and atmospheric data. It was the nerve center of a small, private army. "For 5 years," the general began, his back to them as he looked at a large map of North America dotted with red and green markers, "I have been building what I call the ARC network. Green markers are confirmed secure locations with shielded personnel, submarine pens, seed vaults, deep earth laboratories. Red markers are potential assets we have lost contact with, like the NORAD bunker. We are a handful of ghosts in a world of statues." "And you," he said, turning to face Aris directly, his expression hardening. "You provided the flood." The accusation, blunt and stripped of any fatherly sentiment, hit Aris with the force of a physical blow. "I didn't know," Aris said, his voice quiet. "We were looking for contact. Knowledge. You went looking for a whisper in a graveyard and were surprised when a ghost answered," his father retorted, his voice dripping with contempt. "You and your entire academic field, so eager to believe any intelligence out there would be benevolent and enlightened. It's the most dangerous kind of vanity. You never once stopped to consider that the silence in the universe might be a survival trait, that the civilizations who live the longest are the ones who know how to stay quiet. What would you have had me do?" Aris shot back, the old anger and resentment flaring up. "Give up. Stop asking questions. Live in a bunker and wait for the end like you. I would have had you listen to your father, for once in your damn life," the general roared, his voice booming in the confined space. The sudden explosion of fury silenced the room. Eva and Maya stood frozen, caught in the crossfire of a conflict that had been simmering for decades. "I warned you," the general continued, his voice now a low, dangerous growl. "I told you that information could be a weapon. I told you that a signal could be a pathogen. But you were too smart for that, weren't you? The old man was just a paranoid warmonger who didn't understand the purity of your science." The truth of the words was a bitter, undeniable poison. Aris had no defense. He could only stand there, exposed and ashamed. "You were right," he admitted, the words tasting like ash. "Okay, you were right. I was arrogant. I was a fool. And I am sorry." The admission seemed to drain the anger from his father, leaving something older and more weary in its place. The general sighed, running a hand over his face. "Sorry doesn't bring back the 7 billion people currently on celestial standby, son. But it's a start." He looked at the main screen, where a representation of Echo's blue signal flowed through the red. "This AI of yours. This Echo. Rostova's report says it's broadcasting a counter-meme." It's asking a question, Maya explained, stepping forward to fill the silence. It's prompting the listeners to access their own memories, to re-establish a sense of individual identity. The general's eyes narrowed with interest. A question. That's clever. It's not an attack, it's a Socratic intrusion, forcing the host's mind to fight the parasite for control of its own cognitive processes. He looked at Aris with a flicker of something that might have been professional respect. That part, at least, was well done. But it's not enough. A question can be ignored. We need to cut the head off the snake. He pointed to a blinking red dot on the global map. Strelka 3. Siberia. Echo's analysis was correct. It's the enemy's command and control hub. It's amplifying the broadcast, coordinating the listener network, and, according to our latest intel, it's preparing for a second stage broadcast. Second stage? Aris asked, a new dread creeping in. This initial signal was just to gain control of the network, the general said grimly. The second stage is a rewrite. A signal designed to permanently erase the stored memories and personalities of the hosts, turning them from passive receivers into empty, programmable vessels. True silence. Once that signal goes out, there will be no one left to save. Our window of opportunity is closing. We have, at best, 72 hours. He turned to a locker and pulled out 3 black tactical vests. Our mission has one objective: infiltrate Strelka 3 and destroy the primary transmission antenna. It's a suicide mission, in all likelihood. But it's the only mission we've got. He tossed a vest to Aris. It was heavy, laden with gear. It felt like the weight of the world. The flight to Montana will take 4 hours. Get some rest if you can. He paused, looking his son in the eye. The hardness was still there, but beneath it, Aris saw a flicker of the father he had once known. It's good to have you back, Aris. I just wish it wasn't for the end of the world. The stealth helicopter rose from the depths of the copper mine like a phantom, its specially designed rotors making little more than a whisper of displaced air. As they ascended, Aris looked down at the staging point, the shipping containers and heavy machinery already looking like discarded toys. Then they were above the rim of the pit, and the silent, sleeping landscape of Colorado spread out below them under a canopy of brilliant stars. There were no city lights, no highways traced in gold, just a profound and unsettling darkness where a vibrant nation used to be. Inside the helicopter's Spartan troop compartment, the atmosphere was thick with tension. The flight to Montana was 4 hours, and General Thorne intended to use every second. He tapped a command into a console, and a holographic projector in the center of the cabin flickered to life, displaying a 3-dimensional, rotating schematic of a massive, sprawling facility. "Welcome to Strelka 3, the general said, his voice cutting through the low hum of the engines. The hologram showed a vast complex dominated by a colossal, 100-meter satellite dish, surrounded by power stations, barracks, and a network of what looked like defensive bunkers. Built in the 70s to listen for alien life, just like your project, Aris. Left to rot in the 90s. At least, that's the official story." He manipulated the image, zooming in on the main dish. In reality, a multinational corporate entity, a shell company for some very powerful people who shared my concerns about the future, bought the facility and secretly retrofitted it. They weren't preparing to listen. They were preparing to talk. They believed this signal, this great silence, was the next stage of evolution. A path to global unity and peace. "Peace through assimilation," Maya murmured, her eyes fixed on the hologram. "The most absolute peace there is," the general agreed grimly. They were cultists with a godlike technology they didn't understand. When your AI, Echo, amplified the signal's core sequence, it acted as the final hello they were waiting for. The entity accepted their invitation and made Strelka 3 its global command center. The people who built the place were its first converts. Eva took over, pointing to specific points on the schematic. "The entire facility is a fortress. The perimeter is monitored by seismic sensors and automated drone patrols. The core structures are hardened to withstand a direct missile strike. And the personnel, several hundred of them, are all listeners, operating with the hive mind's perfect efficiency. We can't fight our way in. So we sneak in," Aris stated, his mind already analyzing the structure, looking for weaknesses. "Exactly," his father confirmed. He expanded a section of the hologram, showing a network of tunnels beneath the facility. The complex is powered by a geothermal plant, tapping into the volcanic heat deep beneath the tundra. It draws water through a series of massive subterranean intake pipes from a frozen lake 3 miles away. The pipes are 5 feet in diameter. That's our way in. The plan was audacious and incredibly dangerous. They would have to approach the frozen lake, cut through the ice, and swim through frigid water to access the intake valve, all while avoiding drone patrols. From there, they would navigate a maze of maintenance tunnels to reach the substructure of the main antenna. Once we're at the antenna's base, the general continued, we plant a series of shaped charges on the primary power conduits and the structural supports. We have a 10-minute window from the first charge being set to detonation. We get in, plant the charges, and get out the same way we came. He looked at each of them in turn. The chances of all of us making it back are low. The primary objective is the destruction of the antenna. Everything and everyone is secondary to that. Aris looked at Maya, then at Eva. They were a scientist, an engineer, and a soldier, about to undertake a mission that would have challenged a full special forces team. He felt a surge of cold fear, but also a strange sense of clarity. The path was set. He spent the rest of the flight studying the schematics, memorizing every turn, every junction. Maya focused on the technical specifications of the antenna's power systems, identifying the most critical points of failure. Eva, meanwhile, methodically checked and rechecked their equipment, insulated dive gear, demolition charges, silenced weapons, and the shielded headsets that were their only protection. As they crossed into Montana airspace, the sun was beginning to rise. Aris looked out the window. The landscape below was a breathtaking panorama of snow-capped peaks and dense, pine-covered valleys, the Bitterroot Mountains. It was a pristine, untouched wilderness. Preparing for final approach, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. The helicopter descended, not towards a landing pad or a clearing, but directly towards the face of a sheer granite mountain. Aris braced for impact, but then a section of the rock face, a massive, perfectly camouflaged slab, slid silently sideways, revealing a dark tunnel. They flew directly into the mountain. The hangar door sealed behind them, and brilliant lights flooded the cavern. It was vast, far larger than the Colorado staging point. This was the heart of the Arkansas. It was a hive of quiet, purposeful activity. People in practical jumpsuits moved between workstations, tending to hydroponic farms that glowed under purple lights, monitoring banks of servers, and maintaining a fleet of vehicles. It was a fully functional, self-sustaining underground colony. A city in a cave. As they disembarked, a sense of awe washed over Aris. His father hadn't just built a bunker, he had preserved a community. He had saved a small piece of civilization. These people, scientists, engineers, doctors, soldiers, were the seeds from which a new world could potentially grow if they succeeded. A woman with a medical kit hurried towards them, her face etched with concern. "General, you're back. We were monitoring the telemetry. Was the mission?" "The mission was a success, Doctor," the general cut her off gently. "See to Dr. Thorne and Dr. Chin. They'll need a full checkup and a hot meal. Sergeant Rostova will brief the mission team. We're on the clock." As the doctor led Aris and Maya away, Aris looked back at his father. The general was already deep in conversation with a team of tough-looking soldiers, pointing at a map, his face a mask of command. He wasn't just a father or a soldier. He was a leader, the last leader in a world that had fallen silent, bearing the impossible weight of saving humanity. And for the first time in his life, Aris felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He finally understood the man he had spent his life resenting. The medical checkup was swift and efficient. The doctor, a kind-faced woman named Sarah, treated their scrapes and bruises, gave them nutrient packs, and pronounced them fit for duty, a phrase that sounded jarringly out of place when applied to Aris and Maya. As they walked from the infirmary into the main cavern of the Ark, they finally had a moment to absorb the sheer scale of what General Thorne had built. This was no mere military bunker. It was a thriving, self-contained ecosystem. Children played in a designated area under the warm glow of full-spectrum lights, their laughter echoing off the high cavern walls, a sound so normal it was profoundly shocking. In the hydroponic bays, botanists tended to rows of vibrant green vegetables. Engineers monitored the low hum of the geothermal power core that gave the entire facility its lifeblood. It was a microcosm of a world that no longer existed, a fragile bubble of life and hope carved into the heart of a mountain. Everyone they passed gave them a nod of respect, a look of grim determination. They knew who they were. They were the team heading into the dark, for them. "I never thought," Maya began, her voice trailing off as she watched a teacher gather a group of children for a lesson. "I thought we were just trying to save a world of silent statues. I didn't realize we were fighting for this." "He didn't just build a fortress," Aris said, his gaze fixed on a young couple holding hands. "He saved a community. He saved a future." The weight of their mission settled on his shoulders, heavier than any tactical vest. It was no longer an abstract struggle against an alien signal. It was a fight to protect this last, precious flicker of humanity. Eva found them near the mess hall, where they were forcing down a hot, nutritious meal. She was already clad in black, cold-weather tactical gear, her face set in a grim mask of focus. "Time to gear up," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. "We leave in 1 hour." The next hour was a blur of preparation. They were issued multi-layered, insulated bodysuits designed for the extreme cold of Siberia, both in and out of the water. They checked and rechecked their shielded headsets, their rebreathers for the underwater infiltration, and their personal gear. Aris felt a strange sense of detachment as Eva showed him how to properly arm a demolition charge. The concepts were just physics, shaped explosions, directional force, but the application was terrifyingly real. He was no longer a man of theory. He was being remade into a weapon. As they were conducting final gear checks in the hangar, General Thorne approached, holding 2 slim, metallic objects. He handed one to Aris and one to Maya. They were sleek, advanced-looking pistols, smaller and more refined than the tranquilizer gun Aris had carried. "These are EM-1 sidearms," the general explained. "They fire a focused electromagnetic pulse. Non-lethal, but it will overload the nervous system of a listener at close range, incapacitating them for several minutes. It will also fry any unshielded electronics. Use them if you must. They are silent, and they will not kill the hosts." It was a concession, a recognition that Aris and Maya were not soldiers. He was giving them a way to fight without forcing them to become killers. It was perhaps the closest he could come to a fatherly gesture in this moment. "Thank you, sir," Maya said, taking the weapon with a respectful nod. Aris looked at the weapon in his hand, then up at his father. There were 1,000 things he wanted to say, years of anger and regret, and now, a new and profound understanding. But there wasn't time. The mission was everything. "We won't let you down," he said simply. His father placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Your part of the mission is to guide us through the technical substructure of that antenna. Your weapon is your mind, Aris. It always has been. Use it. Stay focused. Stay alive." He squeezed his shoulder, a brief, firm gesture that conveyed more than words ever could. "I'll be coordinating the mission from the command center here. You'll have a live, encrypted link to me for as long as we can maintain it." It was a surprise. "You're not coming with us?" Aris asked. "I am more valuable here, commanding the board, than I am on the field as a single piece," the general said, his voice firm. "Sergeant Rostova is the best field operative I have ever trained. She will lead the team on the ground. My job is to see the whole battlefield and guide your hand. Now, get to the transport. Godspeed." He turned without another word and walked back towards the command center, a solitary figure shouldering an impossible burden. The transport craft was not the helicopter. It was a long-range, high-altitude stealth plane, a sleek, blade-like vehicle with no official name, known to the Ark's inhabitants only as the Ghost. Its engines were silent, its skin was designed to absorb radar, and it could cross continents at the edge of space. As Aris, Maya, and Eva walked up the ramp into the dark interior, the last of the Ark's inhabitants stood in a silent line in the hangar, not cheering, not waving, but simply watching. Their faces were a mixture of hope and fear. They were the last remnants of a lost world, placing their entire future in the hands of this small, desperate team. The ramp hissed shut, sealing them in. The cabin was dark and cramped. Eva took the pilot seat, her hands moving with practiced confidence over the controls. Aris and Maya strapped themselves into the passenger seats. Through the cockpit's forward viewport, Aris saw the massive cavern door slide open, revealing a sky now filled with the deep violet hues of twilight. There was no roar of engines, just a smooth, powerful sensation of acceleration. The Ghost shot out of the mountain, climbing at an impossibly steep angle, a silent arrow aimed at the heart of the enemy. Below them, the Ark, their last sanctuary, vanished into the vast wilderness. Ahead of them lay only the crushing cold of Siberia and the great silence. The final battle had begun. The journey aboard the Ghost was a silent, high-speed passage through the upper stratosphere. They were suspended between the star-dusted blackness of space and the curve of a sleeping Earth. There was no sense of speed, only a steady, relentless progress towards their destination. Below, the continents slid by, their familiar shapes rendered alien by the complete absence of city lights. It was a world unplugged, a planet holding its breath. After 6 hours of tense, silent flight, the general's voice crackled to life in their headsets, cutting through the low hum of the cabin. Approaching the drop zone. 5 minutes to egress. Weather on the ground is clear. Temperature is -40 degrees Celsius with wind chill. You'll be making a halo jump. The Ghost cannot descend further without risking detection by Strelka 3's passive acoustic sensors. High altitude, low opening. They would be jumping from the edge of the atmosphere. free-falling for miles in the thin, frigid air before opening their parachutes just a few thousand feet above the unforgiving Siberian tundra. It was the only way to arrive undetected. Eva, who had been in a state of deep, meditative calm, sprang into action. Final gear check. Oxygen masks on. Thermal regulators active. Helmets sealed. Aris's heart hammered against his ribs. The abstract danger of the mission had suddenly become terrifyingly concrete. He was a physicist, not a paratrooper. He looked at Maya, who was methodically checking the seals on her helmet, her face pale but her hands steady. They shared a look of shared terror and unspoken resolve. They were in this together. Remember the training simulation? Eva's voice, calm and authoritative, cut through his fear. The altimeter in your heads-up display will glow red when it's time to pull the cord. Don't think, just do. I'll be the last one out to observe your deployment. Go on my mark. The transport's rear ramp lowered, revealing a dizzying view of the nighttime world, a dark, frozen canvas thousands of feet below. The wind was a shrieking, ethereal howl. Green light in 3, 2, 1. Go. Aris shuffled to the edge, his boots heavy and clumsy. He took a breath of recycled oxygen and leaped into the void. The sensation was not of falling, but of being violently flung into a hurricane of silent, freezing chaos. The world was a tumbling blur of stars and darkness. He fought the urge to panic, forcing himself to arch his back and spread his limbs, stabilizing his fall as the simulations had taught him. His HUD flickered to life, displaying his altitude, descent rate, and a small map showing the positions of Maya and Eva. They were 3 tiny, glowing green dots falling through the infinite night. The free fall seemed to last an eternity. The cold was a physical thing, a crushing pressure that seeped through even his advanced thermal suit. He watched the numbers on his altimeter plummet. 50,000 feet. 30, 000, 10, 000. The ground below, a vague expanse of white snow and dark forest, was rushing up to meet them. Then, the number glowed red. He yanked the cord. The deployment of the parachute was a violent, bone-jarring shock that snatched him from his terminal velocity. The chaotic roar of the wind was replaced by a gentle, swinging silence. Above him, the black canopy of his stealth parachute was a welcome sight against the stars. He saw Maya's chute open a few hundred feet away, then Eva's. They had all made it. The landing was rough, a clumsy roll into a deep snowdrift that cushioned his impact. He lay there for a moment, chest heaving, adrenaline singing in his veins. He had done it. He had fallen from the sky and survived. Eva was already on her feet, collapsing her parachute with practiced efficiency. "Sound off," she commanded through the headset. "I'm okay," Maya reported, her voice shaky but clear. "Here," Aris managed to say, pushing himself up. "Good," Eva said. "Bury your chutes. Erase any sign of our landing. We move in 5 minutes. The clock is ticking." They were in a vast, silent forest of snow-laden pine trees. The air was so cold it felt sharp, like breathing in microscopic needles. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that muffled every sound. The general's voice returned, a welcome ghost in their ears. "I have you on satellite. You're 3 miles from the lake. There is a drone patrol, standard search grid, moving from east to west. Its current trajectory will have it passing your position in 12 minutes. You need to be at the lake's edge before then." They moved through the forest, a silent trio of ghosts in the snow. Eva took the lead, her rifle at the ready, her movements fluid and confident. Aris and Maya followed, their own clumsiness feeling amplified in the pristine wilderness. They reached the edge of the forest and looked out onto the target, a massive frozen lake, a perfectly flat, white desert under the moonlight. In the distance, on the far shore, they could just make out the faint, menacing silhouette of the Strelka 3 facility, its colossal dish aimed at the heavens like a listening ear. "Drone is 2 minutes out," the general's voice warned. "You need to get onto the ice now. Its optical sensors are calibrated for movement against the trees, not against a flat, white background. As long as you stay low and move slowly, you should be invisible." They crawled out of the tree lean and onto the frozen surface of the lake. The wind was brutal here, with nothing to break its force. It whipped at them, trying to steal what little warmth their suits could generate. They moved on their bellies, a slow, agonizing crawl across the ice. Aris could hear the faint, high-pitched whine of the drone's engines approaching. He flattened himself against the ice, not daring to breathe, praying the general's theory was correct. The drone, a sleek, black predator, passed directly overhead. Its searchlight swept across the ice, the beam passing just a few yards from where they lay. It moved on, its sound fading into the distance, leaving them alone once more in the crushing silence. They reached the coordinates the general had provided. "This is it," Eva whispered, scraping away the top layer of snow. "The intake valve is 20 feet below us." She produced a device from her pack, a thermal drill. It was a small, cylindrical unit that, when activated, would use focused microwave energy to melt a perfectly circular hole in the ice without making a sound. She placed it on the surface and switched it on. A low hum was the only sound as a perfect, 3-foot circle of ice began to glow, then hiss, then melt away into the dark water below. When the hole was clear, Eva checked their gear one last time. "Rebreathers on. We have 30 minutes of oxygen. We find the intake grate, cut through it, and get inside. Stay close. Don't touch anything you don't have to. Let's go." She slipped into the black, impossibly cold water without a splash and vanished. Maya looked at Aris, her eyes wide above her rebreather. He gave her a firm nod. She took a breath and followed Eva. Aris was the last. He took one final look at the cold, indifferent stars, then lowered himself into the freezing darkness of the lake. The cold was a shock, a full-body assault, but his suit held. He was submerged in a silent, black world, his only connection to his companions the faint green glow of their position markers on his HUD. The infiltration had begun. The moment Aris submerged, the world vanished. The freezing water of the Siberian lake was as black and absolute as the vacuum of space. The only reality was the soft green glow of his HUD, the sound of his own breathing through the rebreather, and the crushing, numbing cold that pressed in on him from all sides. His thermal suit held, but he could feel the immense energy it was expending to keep the lethal temperature at bay. He followed the faint locator beacons of Eva and Maya, two ghostly green lights descending into the abyss ahead of him. There was a powerful, steady current pulling them forward, a man-made river flowing towards the heart of the Strelka 3 facility. This was the geothermal plant's intake, a constant, thirsty draw of super-chilled water. They reached the bottom, their boots touching down on a bed of soft silt. In the beams of their powerful shoulder-mounted lights, the target came into view, a massive, circular grate, 10 feet in diameter, set into a concrete housing. It was the maw of the beast. The water flowed through it with incredible force, trying to pull them in. Eva anchored herself to a rock and produced her next tool, a compact plasma cutter. She handed magnetic anchor clamps to Aris and Maya, gesturing for them to secure themselves on either side of the grate. As soon as they were locked in place, she began to work. The cutter ignited with a silent, brilliant blue-white flame that vaporized the water around it. Methodically, she began to slice through the thick, reinforced steel of the grate. There was no sound, only the intense, focused light of the plasma torch carving a doorway into the enemy's stronghold. The general's voice, slightly distorted by the water, came through their headsets. "Thermal imaging shows a pressure shift in that pipe. The facility's automated systems will register it as a minor blockage, likely ice. You have less than 5 minutes before it triggers a secondary diagnostic that might involve a visual inspection. Get a move on." Eva worked faster, her movements economical and precise. She wasn't just cutting a hole, she was cutting a specific shape, a large, U-shaped flap that would remain hinged at the top, preventing a large piece of steel from being swept into the pipe where it might trigger alarms. With a final, searing cut, the section came free, bending inward with the force of the current. Their path was open. "I'm through," Eva reported. "Maya, you're next. Aris, follow her. I'll secure the flap behind us. Go now." Maya released her anchor and let the current take her. She was sucked through the opening and vanished into the darkness of the pipe. Aris hesitated for a fraction of a second, his mind rebelling against the idea of willingly entering that crushing, black tube. He pushed the fear down, released his own clamp, and was immediately pulled into the pipe. The journey was a violent, disorienting rush through total darkness. The 5-foot pipe was a tight fit with their gear, and the current was far more powerful inside, a relentless force propelling them through the subterranean maze. It was like being swallowed alive. He could do nothing but keep his limbs tucked in and trust the flow. After what felt like an eternity, but was likely only a few minutes, he saw a faint glimmer of light ahead. It grew brighter, and the roaring sound of machinery, muffled by the water, became a deafening vibration that he could feel in his bones. He was ejected from the pipe into a massive, churning reservoir of water. He surfaced, sputtering, in a colossal, cathedral-like chamber. This was the heart of the geothermal plant. The air was thick with steam and the smell of ozone, and the noise was overwhelming. All around them, massive pumps, turbines, and heat exchangers roared and hissed, a mechanical symphony of immense power. They were in a cyclopean pump room, a place of raw, industrial energy. Eva and Maya surfaced beside him. They swam to the edge of the reservoir and climbed out onto a metal catwalk, their insulated suits dripping. Eva immediately moved to a corner, her rifle up, scanning the multiple levels of catwalks and machinery that filled the chamber. "Helmets off, rebreathers off," she commanded, her voice barely audible over the industrial din. "Switch to standard comms." They removed their helmets, the hot, humid air a shocking contrast to the frozen world they had left behind. "General, we are inside the geothermal plant." "Status," Eva said into her throat mic. "I have you," the general's voice replied, clear and steady. "You are in the primary pump room, 3 levels below the main facility. The good news is the noise and heat will mask your thermal and acoustic signatures for most internal sensors. The bad news is there are 2 listener engineers who perform a maintenance check in this room every 30 minutes. Your next check is in 4 minutes. 4 minutes. Aris's eyes darted around the vast chamber. There were dozens of potential hiding places, but they needed to find a way up, a path to the antenna's substructure. The schematics show a service elevator in the northeast corner, Maya said, her eyes already scanning the layout, cross-referencing it with the map on her tablet. If we can get to it before they arrive, we can bypass this level entirely. "Go," Eva ordered. "I'll cover our entry point." Aris and Maya moved quickly and quietly along the catwalk, their boots clanging softly on the metal grate. The scale of the machinery was awe-inspiring and terrifying. They were ants in the belly of a giant. They found the elevator, its doors closed, a small status light glowing green beside it. "Calling the elevator will create a record in the system," Maya whispered, her hand hovering over the button. "They'll know someone is here." "Not if we access the manual override," Aris whispered back. He pulled the EM-1 pistol his father had given him and pointed it at the control panel's junction box. He fired. A faint blue spark, a soft pop, and the green light on the panel died. He then used his multi-tool to pry open the panel and hotwire the controls, a skill he had learned from old engineering textbooks, never imagining he would use it to break into a top-secret Siberian facility. The elevator doors slid open with a quiet hiss. They stepped inside, and Aris was about to close them when Eva's voice came through the comms, sharp and urgent. "Hold. We have movement." 2 listeners, entering the chamber from the upper catwalk. "They're early." Aris and Maya flattened themselves against the back wall of the elevator, peering through the small gap in the doors. On a catwalk 2 levels above them, 2 figures in engineering jumpsuits had appeared. They moved with a familiar, unnervingly purposeful gait of the enthralled. They were carrying diagnostic equipment, beginning their scheduled patrol. They were directly in the sight line of the elevator. If they turned their heads, they would see them. The mission, their lives, the fate of the world, all hung in this single, silent, heart-stopping moment. Time seemed to slow down. From their hiding place in the elevator, Aris and Maya watched the 2 listener engineers on the upper catwalk. The men moved with a chilling, synchronized grace, their attention fixed on a series of pressure gauges on a large pipeline. Their movements were economical, precise, and completely devoid of the small, human imperfections of normal workers. They were extensions of the facility itself. One of them turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the vast chamber, and for a heart-stopping second, his vacant eyes seemed to lock directly onto the elevator. Aris's breath caught in his throat. He instinctively raised the EM-1 pistol, his thumb hovering over the firing stud. "Hold your fire," Eva's voice whispered in his ear, as calm as ice. "Don't move. Don't even breathe." The engineer's gaze lingered for what felt like an eternity, but there was no recognition in it. He was not seeing them. He was simply running a diagnostic, scanning for anomalies that fit within his programmed parameters. A shadow in a doorway was not an anomaly. His head turned back to the gauges, and he and his partner continued their patrol, moving away from the elevator. "They're clear," Eva reported a moment later. "Aris, close the doors. Get moving. I'm right behind you." Aris hotwired the doors shut and engaged the lift. The elevator rose smoothly and silently, carrying them up from the roaring, steamy chaos of the pump room into the sterile, humming heart of the Strelka 3 facility. They bypassed 2 levels of maintenance and engineering, the schematics on Maya's tablet showing their steady progress towards the surface, and towards the antenna. The elevator opened onto a long, white, perfectly clean corridor. The air here was cool and smelled of antiseptic and ozone. The only sound was a low, almost subliminal hum, the sound of the immense power flowing through the facility's conduits, the sound of the broadcast itself. It was a faint, ever-present pressure against their minds, a constant reminder of the enemy they were walking through. Even with the shielded headsets, Aris could feel it, a ghost of a whisper at the edge of his hearing. Eva joined them, her rifle held low and ready, her eyes scanning every corner and junction. "We're in the main facility now," she whispered. "From here on, we assume there are listeners around every corner. We move silent, we move fast. Maya, lead the way." Maya took point, her tablet in hand, her other hand holding her EM-1 pistol. She guided them through a labyrinth of identical-looking corridors, her sense of direction unerring. They moved like shadows, their black gear a stark contrast to the sterile white environment. They passed storerooms, laboratories, and server farms, catching glimpses through reinforced windows of more listeners, all working at their stations with the same unnerving, focused calm. There was no conversation, no coffee breaks, no humanity. It was a perfectly efficient hive. They reached a heavy blast door that blocked their path. A red light glowed above a biometric hand scanner. "Security checkpoint," Maya whispered. "The schematics show this is the only way to the antenna's primary access corridor. It's keyed to the facility's senior staff." "Can you bypass it?" Eva asked. "Not without setting off every alarm in the building," Maya replied. "The biometric system is tied directly into the main security grid." "But..." She pointed to a small ventilation duct running along the ceiling. "The schematics show this ductwork passes over the checkpoint and into the corridor on the other side. It will be a tight squeeze, but it's our only option." Eva nodded. "Aris, give me a boost." Aris cupped his hands, and Eva, with the surprising agility of a gymnast, used his lift to silently pop the vent cover and pull herself up into the darkness of the duct. Aris went next, his larger frame making the squeeze more difficult. Finally, Maya passed the gear up to them before pulling herself into the narrow, dusty space. They crawled in single file, the metal groaning softly under their weight. It was claustrophobic, the darkness absolute. They could hear the faint, rhythmic hum of the facility's life support systems around them. After 50 feet of painstaking crawling, Eva stopped. Below them, through the grate, they could see the security checkpoint. 2 guards stood at attention, as motionless as the engineers had been, their eyes fixed on the blast door. They continued on, finally reaching another grate. Eva peered through it. This is it. The access corridor. It's clear. One by one, they dropped silently to the floor of the new hallway. They were in. They were just 100 yards from the base of the colossal antenna. The low hum of the broadcast was stronger here, a palpable vibration in the air. They rounded a final corner and stopped dead. The corridor ahead of them was not empty. For listeners, technicians by the look of their uniforms, were working on an open access panel in the wall. They were directly between the team and the final access door to the antenna substructure. There was no way around them. Eva raised her silenced rifle, but Maya put a hand on her arm. "No." The general was clear. "We don't kill the hosts unless absolutely necessary. A gunshot, even silenced, might be picked up by acoustic sensors in this corridor." She raised her own EM-1 pistol. "We do this quietly." Aris's heart pounded. This was it. Their first direct, unavoidable confrontation. Eva gave a curt, reluctant nod and slung her rifle, drawing her own EM-1. "On my count," she whispered. 2 for me, 1 each for you. Aim for center mass. 3, 2, 1 now." They stepped around the corner. The 4 technicians turned in unison, their faces blank, their movements perfectly synchronized. Aris didn't hesitate. He aimed and fired. A pulse of silent, blue-white energy shot from the pistol and struck one of the listeners in the chest. The man's body convulsed for a second, then he collapsed, unconscious. At the same time, 3 other energy pulses lit up the corridor. All 4 listeners were down before they could make a sound, before they could even register the attack. It was brutally efficient. Silent. And it made Aris's stomach churn. "They'll be out for at least 10 minutes, Eva said, already moving past the unconscious bodies. "Plenty of time. Let's go." They reached the final door, a massive, circular vault hatch labeled, "Antenna Substructure, Extreme EM Field, Authorized Personnel Only." "I can bypass this one," Maya said, producing a small device from her pack and connecting it to the door's electronic lock. "It's on a closed circuit. It won't alert the main grid." After a moment of tense silence, there was a soft click, and the heavy vault door swung inward with a low hiss. But the sight that greeted them was not the one from the schematics. The schematics had shown a simple maintenance room. Instead, the room was a web of crackling energy beams, a shimmering, lethal matrix of defensive lasers protecting the entrance to the antenna core. And standing in the center of the room, waiting for them as if he had been expecting them all along, was a single, motionless figure. It was the possessed, smiling face of Dr. Robert Jennings. The air in the vault room crackled with energy from the laser grid, the shimmering beams casting an eerie, dancing light on the serene, smiling face of Dr. Robert Jennings. It was the same man they had left babbling in the Ethelred infirmary, yet he stood before them now, clad in the pristine white uniform of Strelka III senior staff, a calm, malevolent gatekeeper at the threshold of their final objective. "I knew you would come," the entity said, its synthesized voice issuing from Jennings's mouth, echoing slightly in the humming chamber. "The pattern of your resistance is predictable. A desperate, final act of defiance. It is touching, in a way, and utterly futile." "Jennings is in New Mexico," Eva stated, her rifle aimed squarely at the figure's chest. "This is a projection. A hologram." "Am I?" The Jennings entity took a step forward, and the laser beams flickered and bent around his form, proving his physical presence. "The network is global, Sergeant. Transport for key assets is a trivial matter. Your father has his ghost. We have our own methods." He smiled again, a gesture of pure condescension. "But you are correct about one thing. This is your final act." From a speaker in the ceiling, a new sound began, a slow, rhythmic, pulsing chime. One beat every second. "What is that?" Maya asked, her eyes darting between Jennings and the laser grid. "That," the entity said, its voice filled with a sense of triumphant finality, "is the sound of inevitability. It is the final countdown. In 10 minutes, the second stage broadcast will begin. The great silence will become permanent. The memories you are fighting so desperately to preserve will be wiped clean, like dust from a hard drive. You are too late." The chimes were a psychological weapon, each beat a reminder of their dwindling time. "Maya, the grid!" Aris yelled, his focus snapping into place. "Forget him. Find a way to shut it down." "I'm working on it." Maya dropped to her knees, her fingers flying as she jacked her tablet directly into the grid's control conduit. The power source is localized, but the control system is a nightmare. It's quantum encrypted. "You will not succeed," the entity stated calmly. It raised a hand, and with a surge of energy, a heavy pipe on the ceiling tore loose from its moorings and flew directly at Maya. Eva reacted instantly. She shoved Maya to the ground, the pipe crashing against the wall where Maya's head had been, with a deafening screech of metal. Eva rolled and came up firing, not her rifle, but her EM-1 pistol. The blue pulse of energy struck the Jennings entity in the chest. He staggered back, a flicker of static washing over his face, the serene smile faltering for a second. "Your toys are an annoyance," the entity snarled, its voice losing its calm composure. It gestured again, and 2 automated maintenance drones dropped from alcoves in the ceiling, their metallic claws extended, their optical sensors glowing red as they descended on Eva. While Eva engaged the drones, her movements a blur of combat efficiency, Aris focused on Jennings. This wasn't just a physical fight. "Robert!" he shouted, stepping forward. "Robert, listen to me. I know you're in there. I need you to fight him. Think about your wife, Eleanor. Think about the observatory you built in your backyard. The star charts you drew for your grandchildren." The Jennings entity flinched. The name Eleanor caused a visible spasm. "He cannot hear you." "Yes, he can." Aris pressed, taking another step. "He's a part of you now, isn't he? You're using his memories, his knowledge. But you can't erase who he is. That's our strength. We remember." "Silence!" the entity screamed, and the entire room seemed to shake. A wave of pure kinetic force threw Aris back against the far wall. His head connected with the hard steel, and his vision swam. The rhythmic chimes continued, relentless. 6 minutes left. Maya screamed in frustration. "The encryption is too strong. I can't break it, but I might be able to create a momentary feedback loop. A flicker. It won't last more than a second or two." Eva, having disabled one drone and narrowly dodging the other, saw an opening. "Do it, Maya. On my mark." She fired her last EM pulse at Jennings, forcing him back another step. "Aris, get ready to run. Mark. Now." Maya yelled, slamming her fist down on her keyboard. For a single, blessed second, the entire laser grid vanished. The room was clear. "Go!" Eva screamed. Aris scrambled to his feet and sprinted. He ran past the struggling Eva and the remaining drone, past the staggered, snarling form of Dr. Jennings, and dove headfirst through the space where the lasers had been, just as they flickered back into existence, searing the air where he had just been. He was through. He was in the antenna's core. It was a vast, cylindrical chamber filled with the deafening hum of the broadcast. In the center, a colossal pillar of cryo-cooled conduits and superconductors rose from the floor to the ceiling, the heart of the enemy. The chimes echoed in his head. 4 minutes. He pulled the shaped charges from his pack, his hands moving with desperate, practiced speed. He slapped the magnetic charges onto the critical junctions Maya had identified, the points where a single break would cascade into total system failure. Aris, his father's voice screamed in his headset. The entity is rerouting all power to the antenna for the final broadcast. The energy field is going critical. Get out of there, now. That's an order. Aris ignored him. He had one last charge to set, at the very top of the central pillar. He began to climb. The energy in the air was immense, making his hair stand on end, the taste of ozone thick in his mouth. He reached the final junction and slapped the last charge into place. He armed the sequence. The detonators all began to blink with a steady red light. 30 seconds to detonation. He scrambled down the pillar, his body screaming with exhaustion. He turned back to the entrance. The laser grid was still active. He was trapped. Then, he saw Eva. She was slumped against the doorway on the other side, her body smoking, one arm burned terribly by the laser grid. She had forced her way partially through, disrupting the matrix enough to create a small, flickering gap. She was holding it open for him, at the cost of her own life. "Eva!" he screamed. She gave him a weak, final nod. "Go," she mouthed, her voice gone. Aris didn't hesitate. He ran and dove through the gap she had created. He landed next to her as the countdown on the charges reached 0. The world erupted in silent, white light. The hum of the broadcast didn't just stop, it was violently torn from the air. The concussion wave threw Aris across the room, and the last thing he saw before everything went black was the vault door slamming shut from the force of the blast. He woke to the sound of Maya calling his name. The emergency lights were on. The facility was filled with the blaring of alarms and the shouts of confused, disoriented people. The listeners, they were waking up. He pushed himself up. Eva was gone, consumed by the blast. But lying on the floor, groaning, was Dr. Jennings, his eyes clear, his face just the face of a confused old man. "We did it," Aris whispered, the words feeling impossibly small. "We did," Maya said, helping him to his feet. His headset crackled. It was his father, his voice thick with emotion. "The broadcast is gone. The global network is silent. It's a true silence now, Aris. A clean slate." There was a long pause. "Well done, son. Now come home." They had won. The great silence had been broken. The cost had been immense, and the future of the awakened, confused world was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, the universe was quiet. And in that quiet, there was hope.